kind of nervous. Baseball conversation. And we are live. This isn't an NBA show. I know you might be confused. This is the MLB tutorial show. We needed to do a little talking about what's happening now in the transition from NBA to MLB. I am Josh Engleman, and I am joined by the boss man himself, the man at the top of most DFS tournaments. That would be Alex Baker, Awesemo himself. Alex, how are you?
What's up, man? Yeah, it feels a little weird today with no NBA, so this is the perfect time to talk about some baseball, and I'm sure some of you guys watching have been waiting to dive into baseball until basketball cooled down a little bit, so this is the perfect time.
I assume that we are going to be doing a transition show from the NBA to the WNBA. I know that you are a strong proponent of that sport, but in this case, we're going to go from NBA to MLB. Because I think it is, in general, for all of the major sports that we do cover, this is kind of the biggest stark change. The difference in NBA to MLB is pretty massive across all major facets of the game. So I think it's really important for us to dive in, hit on some of the key factors as we go, and sort of give everybody the blueprint. If you haven't been playing MLB, if you're not as familiar with it, it's a lot different than playing NBA DFS. So we want to make sure that you have all of the correct information as we move forward, because all we've got left for NBA in general are going to be showdown contests. I know we do see on DraftKings some 2 days, but that's sort of a different mechanism, not going to have the same sort of prize pool. So we're moving on to MLB, whether you like it or not, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I know we play because of the love of the sport, but what's even better than the love of the sport is the big prize pools. So this is the perfect time because MLB is getting bigger now that basketball doesn't have a slate to that.
Absolutely. So you guys know the drill here. Hit the like button. I want to run those likes up as high as possible. Let the powers that be know I'm pulling in the ratings. So hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, all that good stuff. So we're talking MLB and we're talking the NBA to MLB the transition. And I think the biggest spot that we want to start is in terms of volatility. And the best way that I can think to describe that transition is comparing someone like Mike Trout in baseball. Might be not the best example right now, but Mike Trout will work, to LeBron James. In basketball, when you roster LeBron James, he's never going over. He's not just going to provide you nothing, barring injury. Mike Trout can step up there, go over 4, and you have no fantasy points for it. How do you best explain the volatility in baseball in comparison to the volatility in the NBA?
Yeah, that's a great comparison because LeBron James contributes in every category with assists, rebounds, and points. And so does Mike Trout because he can not only hit the homers, but he can steal some bags too. But, I mean, the mechanics of the sport are just so much different where Mike Trout is hitting a home run like 1 in every 4 games in a good year. Like that'd be like a 40 home run season, which is considered like pretty exceptional. So that means 3 out of 4 times you're not going to get a homer. So like a lot of times you'll see Mike Trout, he'll have that 25% ownership, which is just in line with his chance of hitting a homer. So really, you can bet a lot more against star players to fail.
And that makes, perfect sense. The way that scoring is accumulated as well, very different. Mike Trout's going to step up the bat, generally speaking, in the first inning, or we'll say that it's in the first inning. And then for an hour, he's not going to accumulate another stat, generally speaking. Whereas LeBron is going to be a slow trickle. You grab a point, you grab a 3 here and an assist here and a block there. And you get in general, NBA scoring is going to be basically a bell curve. Most people are going to fall in a normal distribution of scoring. There's enough scoring opportunities that it becomes pretty easy to predict. Baseball, not so much. If you hit a home run, it's not a little bit of a jump and then maybe you get another home run. That's not how this works. You hit a home run and you are immediately in the running for being legitimate for that day. Is there anything to the distribution of scoring for individual hitters that you would want to touch on? Anything that's important in that range?
Definitely. I mean, there's 2 things. One is the pitchers are much more like basketball, where it is like a pretty predictable outcome because they're facing 25 batters, where each at bat or each batter only gets like 4 plate appearances, so the amount of opportunities is way different. But the thing with batters is like even like your average scrub, maybe they hit home runs 10 to 15 times a year. Or like usually guys can either hit home runs or steal bases if they're not like a catcher or something. So like even the guys at the bottom of the order have tremendous upside. I remember one season like a few years ago, Jackie Bradley Jr. kept batting like eighth or ninth for the Red
Yeah.
Sox, and he had a run where he had like 30 or 40 points, like at least like a half dozen times, and we lost all the money during that span. But that's baseball, man.
And those guys are showing up, generally speaking, at the beginning of that 1% owned, 2% owned on slates. And they're the bottom of the order. And for a lot of those types of guys are sort of like the third and fourth wide receivers in an NFL game. You're never expecting those guys to get a ton of targets. But the difference here is that opportunity is fixed in baseball. You can play an NBA game and not take shots. You can be Ben Simmons and just simply not be a part of an offense. That is a possibility. For baseball, no matter what, 1 through 9 is happening, and then you're running it back again from the beginning. Nothing's getting mixed up. You can feel pretty comfortable about the order, or the amount of plate appearances that you're going to see for each individual player, because it's already set in stone. Now, the more success the team has, the more plate appearances you are going to have, the more fantasy points you are apt to score. But knowing that you are going to get opportunity no matter what, that is where we differ a little bit from that third and fourth wide receiver analogy that I just tried to go with. No matter what, that number 8 hitter is going to step up to the plate. Is there anything that people should look at for in terms of building out lineups, because that you can get plate appearances from that bottom of the order? Is that an area you want to focus on, or are you going to be more focused on the top of the order?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like cash versus GPP, where like the farther down you go, it's like the less opportunities, but each one can be comparatively close in value. So like the difference in number of plate appearances from like the number 1 spot in the lineup to the number 9 is about like 2/3 of a plate appearance, or maybe a little bit more than that. So you're talking like 3.2 plate appearances compared to like 4. So it is a big difference as far as the opportunities. And that's why like if you're banking on that bottom of the order guy to get more than his average plate appearances, that's when we start talking about some stacks.
Absolutely. I think it's a perfect opportunity to transition into talking about stacks. Perfect. Thank you so much for setting me up on that one. By the way, everybody, if you're interested, you don't want to go anywhere on this stream. 5 p.m. coming up after this, MLB Deeper Dive. Alex isn't going anywhere. I'm bailing out of here. Greg's popping in for me. You're getting another full hour breaking down each game by game. And then MLB Live Before Lock, Spags and Eric taking you all the way up to 7:05. So it should be a good time. You don't want to go anywhere. This stream is going to be hot today. Now, stacking. In basketball, you're generally speaking not paying attention to it all that much. The smaller the slate, the more likely you're going to be stacking, both from a forced opportunity standpoint. You just run out of guys that you could actually have. But 2, the impact of one outlier game is bigger on a 3-game NBA slate. On a 10-gamer, you're not really paying attention to any sort of stacking strategies. Is that the same for MLB?
Stacking is a lot better in MLB because in NBA, like there's only one basketball, so only one player can be scoring at a time. There's some correlations with like the number of minutes played and overtimes, but in most cases, if one player does well, it doesn't really have much bearing on how another player does. But in baseball, the success of a team, like each individual, is a lot more tied into the other players for a few reasons. One is the number of plate appearances is variable based on the success of the team. So a lot of it is like if the team gets on base like 9 more times, that's an extra plate appearance for everyone. That's like a 25% increase in your fantasy potential because it's going from like 4 to 5 plate appearances. And the other thing is just the mechanics of the game. Like when guys are on base, it makes it harder for the pitcher to throw their best stuff because they have to go from pitching from the stretch to Man, I'm such a baseball noob. I can't even think of it right now. But
They're switching from the wind up to the stretch.
the wind up to the stretch. So appreciate it, man. And the numbers for batters do improve with batters with players on base versus not on base.
Yeah, so it's, as we mentioned out of the gate, this is another key piece of why MLB DFS is going to be significantly different than NBA DFS, because stacking is prevalent. You will see that if you use something like FC lineup study, where you can go back and look at the results from previous days. You can break down exactly how each game and how each contest has been stacked by each individual entry. That will help lead you to potentially some more answers for what you're looking to do. What are your thoughts on individual stacking strategies, whether that's FanDuel or DraftKings, if you want to make a preference to either one?
Yeah, in general, stacking is a little bit better on FanDuel than DraftKings, but you should be stacking on both. But FanDuel rewards RBIs and runs higher proportional to other scoring. But the main thing is most stacks are going to fail on a given night. Like, you really need your stack to go out and score at least 10 runs. The probability of that happening is low, even for the best of spots, like even in Coors Field. And that's where we start working in like these probabilities that teams will succeed, because like even the bottom of this teams, like one that's facing a tough pitcher, there's still a realistic chance they'll break the slate. Like, for instance, tonight, the highest team has a 24% chance of being the top stack in our top stacks tool, and the lowest team has a 3% chance. But 3%, if the team is like 1% owned, that's still kind of intriguing. So there's a lot of game theory that goes into it.
Yeah, it gets really tricky there, because in theory, every single team is live each day. And that's not necessarily the case in some other spots. Like, no matter what, there are reasons, public ownership might be the problem, but there, you can make a case for everybody on a given slate. Every single player that you know is going to play is a viable person to roster, depending on their salary and their current ownership. If Joe Blow, number 9 hitter, is $5K and he's picking up 10% ownership or something, yeah, that might be a guy that you're trying to not put in a player pool for the day. But in general, you're able to get to anything, which leads to, I'm guessing you're basically rarely duped in comparison to some other spots, just because there are so many different combinations. The difference between stacking for FanDuel and DraftKings, and you alluded a little bit before, slightly more advantageous for FanDuel. They also have different maximums for the amount of people that you can stack, or at least they did as of last year. I'll let you guys know when I get to my personal MLB DFS tutorial. In your personal opinion, is there a correct way to stack? Whether that's maxing it out on FanDuel, a 4-4, or maxing it out on DraftKings with a 5, and if you want, 3.
So my general advice for someone is, if you want to guarantee that you're going to have a competitive lineup, you're best off just stacking all of the players in your lineup. So on DraftKings, that would be like a 5-3. On FanDuel, a 4-4. That means 5 players from one team and 3 from the other. So that's because like the correlation is very important, and that guarantees no one will be able to get an advantage over you. But the problem with stacking that much is there aren't as many ways to put together the lineup. You can't take advantage of some of the cheap punts, or maybe like 2 stacks just don't fit together that well under the salary cap. And that's where you can kind of broaden your lineup construction and start deviating away from that kind of basic strategy of stacking all your batters.
Are there any scenarios where you're not worried about stacking?
So in cash games, I don't really go out of my way to stack or not stack. I'll say that. And part of the reason is, like, if you have a lot of players from one team in cash, your opponents are going to have all those guys too. So it's almost like you're not stacking when it comes to practical comparison of the 2 lineups. But in tournaments, the force that's kind of working against stacking is that like certain player combinations are going to be much higher owned than others. So like if you have Mike Trout and Ohtani in the same lineup, like they're going to appear much more frequently together than individually like all things considered. So I know we talk in NBA about how you can multiply the ownerships and kind of the idea of how many people are going to have that combination. In baseball, because people gravitate toward those stacks, it doesn't work quite like that. So that's kind of like you're going to have a very like more similar lineup to other people if you stack, but you also have that advantage with those players having correlated performances.
Is there anything else you would want to touch on from a stacking perspective, whether that's for FanDuel or for DraftKings, that you think we've missed so far?
I think just leveraging the available tools. So like one thing I'll mention is like I see baseball as more of a macro analysis sport than basketball, where like you focus on the individual players. In baseball, I think it's probably not worth the time to really go into every single batter. You're really looking at if I know this team's going to be the highest scoring, or if I'm gambling on that, then I want the like right 5-player combination or 4-player combination, and that's very hard to predict, even if you know which stack is the highest scoring. So it's almost like you gotta just kind of take your chances and pick the guys that fit your other players in the lineup, and not worry about too much which 5 guys you end up with.
Dennis Bullman in YouTube chat asked a question. I'm going to hit you with it quick because I see it and I'm going to ask it. He said, Alex, what's your thought on 3-3-2 stacks on FanDuel?
I think 3-3-2 is it's intriguing. I'd say the one thing I'm trying to avoid when I'm not stacking 4-4 is like having other lineups that are superior to mine, given the circumstances I'm playing for. So like say these 2 stacks do really well, these 3 batters on both teams. The problem is you could probably pivot from that 2-person stack to another player on that 3-person stack. And in that instance, that team goes off, like you're going to have much better odds than trying to hit 3 different stacks. So you are like putting yourself at a disadvantage if you go 3-3-2 to those guys that have the same teams with 4 guys from each team. So you should have a good reason if you're pursuing that lineup construction. It wouldn't be something I would set out to do.
There we go. All right, before we close this one out with a little bit of cash versus GPP discussion, one, I'm going to ask for more likes. We just crested 100. Makes me feel fantastic. Looks like someone sent in a super chat. Oh, perfect. Jacob, super chat. Love it. Your emoji, my mustache emoji, and just called us studs. So Jacob, obviously a smart gentleman, very much appreciate that super chat. So thank you very much there. But yeah, hit that like button once again. We want to run that number up. Let everybody know who's boss. And that would be Alex. In fact, he is the boss around here. It's awesemo.com for a reason, folks. But anyway, we got to talk a little bit about Odds Shopper too. Now, if you're looking to bet on baseball or any sports in general, really, you should be going to oddshopper.com so that you can track lines across multiple books. You can get alerts when they change. You can track results if you'd like, but you got to shop around for all sports betting. If you're not getting the best line that you possibly can, you are leaving money on the table. So make sure you are going to Odds Shopper if you're betting on a day-to-day basis. Jordan's pulling it up on the screen right now. You can see it. You could access multiple different sports. It's also a very good source for information if you're putting out, say, a new betting video. That could be a thing. That could be a thing that you're doing. Say if you're me and Ben Raza. That could be the breakfast menu.
Sounds like a very specific comparison.
It is a very specific comparison because the breakfast menu dropped today, the first video in Ben and I's new series. You definitely want to check it out. We're putting out betting videos every single day, and I would be remiss to not plug my own stuff while I've got the chance. So go check that out. But really, Odds Shopper, you see it at the top banner. You got to go there if you're betting. If like even just something as simple as you can get even money on a game instead of minus 110. Over and over again, the compounding of that is massive for you. Don't leave that money on the table. Odds Shopper will help you get through it all. So we wanted to close it out. Cash versus GPP, because it is a pretty big distinction in baseball. Because again, in the NBA, you're not stacking, you're not doing anything different. And we could also, I guess, touch on a little bit about weather, where there's more scoring in hot weather. You got to worry about rainouts. That's certainly not something that you have to worry about in the NBA. Can you sum up the weather experience before you get into the cash GPP scenario? Is there anything you're particularly paying attention to for weather? Obviously, rain being the biggie.
So the easiest thing to do with weather when you're starting out is leverage the expertise of other people. So what we have on our site is the percentage chance that we think a game will be postponed. And that's something that's kind of integral in my process, because even if a game you think it is unlikely to get postponed, you have it at like 10%. That has like really significant implications for how you should build your lineups. So I'm never trying to like peg if a game will for sure get postponed or not. I'm trying to kind of figure out the risk and go from there. So make sure to check that out. There's some other good resources too, I'm sure, that are easy to find. So but the other thing that you mentioned is like for hitting, like the hotter it is, and also the elevation like impacts how likely hitters are to succeed. The best starting point for that is the team totals, and Jordan has them up here on our lineup builder, where Vegas, you can take their sports betting lines, which are very efficient, and deduce how many runs on average a team's going to score. Now, the team totals on our lineup builder are a little bit different than you'll see in other sources, and that's because like most people, they put the median for this, and for DFS, I feel like it's a lot better to use the mean, because like you can't score less than 0 runs. The mean is always significantly higher than the median for baseball. So this will give you like on average how many runs will be scored for each team, and that's like a great metric to go from for figuring out how good the stack is.
Just so people understand the difference between mean and median for those that have no idea.
Yeah, median is just like if you're betting the line, like the chance that it'll be over or under a certain number is 50%. But mean is just if you average out all the results, that's the number. So like if you bet a over under of 8 in baseball, the average number of runs that will be scored is closer to like 8.5 if you average out all the actual results.
There we go. So let's close this out. We got about 7 minutes to go here. We'll go 6. So the man behind the virtual glass, Jordan Klein, can transition this one over. Let's talk a little bit about cash versus GPP. You mentioned a little earlier that in cash games, you're significantly less, I don't want to say less interested, but it is not a priority for you in cash games to be stacking. What are you looking for in a cash game when you're building out that cash lineup?
So like the big difference between cash and GPP is like, a lot of times there's going to be some guy that the sites don't have price to bat high in the order. And then for whatever reason, they're batting second in the order that day. So they're massively underpriced. And that can be a really good cash play. But in GPPs, maybe the ownership's really high. So it kind of negates the advantage you get from going there. So like in GPPs, I try not to over optimize my lines for projection too much because of how much volatility there is in baseball. But cash, we're just going for the best average outcomes. So we're trying to get those stud pitchers by leveraging these really underpriced bats that are going to be high owned.
Is there anything else you're looking for a cash game? How much are you paying attention to public ownership when making those decisions? And what is the distinction between pitching and hitting in terms of cash style lineups?
So the most important thing in cash games is who you're playing against. So stick to the single entry, double ups. If you can get good head-to-head opponents, the problem most people make with cash games is simply just entering the wrong contests where the site fee is going to be higher than the possible edge you can get. So after that, after you figure out the right contests, it's actually easy to make money in cash. You just have to put it in the optimal lineup, so you can use our projections to figure that out. But for cash, the other difference is like, I guess like the pitchers you want in cash and GPP are pretty similar because pitcher is a lot more predictable than hitters. But maybe like you wouldn't want the 2 highest owned pitchers combination in the same lineup as much in GPPs, because like that kind of like the two pitchers you have kind of funnels you into a certain line of construction, and that might make you overlap even if you're not trying to with the rest of your players.
Are you opposed to stacking in a cash game? Like if it just ends up like that, or is that something you're going to try to avoid? Or is that a thing that you're very much not trying to overload on?
So like the reason you wouldn't want to stack in a cash game is because you get more volatility since those are correlated. But the reason I don't worry about stacking in cash games is because like the usual time it happens is like one team's in a really good spot, like Coors Field or something. And like everyone has like all the batters from Coors Field. So really like it's going to be more, instead of a 9v9, you're really playing like 4v4 versus other people, or 5v5, or however it shakes out. And when you take away those shared players, the net result usually is going to be you're not stacking if their lineup makes sense.
Now for GPPs, obviously we've touched on it. Stacking rules the roost here. You're going to be looking to put together stacks. In my opinion, the best way to do that is to use our top stacks tool. So you should be going to awesemo.com and signing up. I don't have a promo code for Awesemo Daily Fantasy Tutorial Show. That one seems pretty long, so it's probably up our alley, but definitely use MLB Deeper Dive once these guys get up on this next show. That would be a great promo code for you to sign up. The top stacks tool to me is the best tool that we have. It was, I believe, the first one that we put out with some of the more advanced data a couple years, probably 2 years ago now. That changed everything for me in baseball. And I've got a lot more money in my pocket because of it. What would you do using our top stacks tool in order to go about building that GPP lineup?
So I'd say like if a team has a higher chance of being the top stack compared to their ownership, it's usually a team that you can build a pretty profitable lineup around. That's not to say like a team with higher ownership than the top stack is bad. You're just gonna have to try a lot harder to get unique with that lineup. So like you always want a path to victory with your lineup where like you have certain conditions that can be met that no one else can. So picking a low stack is a good way to do that. If you go with a high owned stack, you're going to have to really mix it up with the rest of your lineup.
Hey, we just got the question from Steven Leibowitz. In a small GPP, under 100, he says, are you less likely to stack?
Honestly, like, I'd say I'm equally likely. Maybe, like, the like, additional optimization you can get by not stacking doesn't help that much in baseball. And kind of in the larger GPPs, if you stack a ton, you're going to overlap more with other people. So I think there's some factors in both the small field and large field that kind of like work. They cancel each other out. So it's about equal in all tournaments.
Is there anything else that you think we missed about the transition from NBA to MLB that you want to touch on before we get out of here? I mean, you're not going anywhere. You're sticking around and staying for the deeper dive, but I am out of here. Anything else you want to touch on?
I just want to mention, like, the thing I love about MLB DFS is, like, you can just sign on the 30 minutes before lock. You have most of the confirmed lineups. You don't really have to worry about, like, all the news and all the, like, factors that NBA has. So it's a lot lower effort, and that's it's like lower effort, and you can win just as much money. So that ratio, I think, is pretty good with MLB.
That's a good point. There's a much less mental toll to the MLB game, less that you have to pay attention to, which is oddly very helpful. You don't get a lot of late scratches in MLB. It can still happen. Like things happen just in life, but you don't get a lot of so-and-so MLB player had too much coffee, he's scratched after the game starts type stuff. Shout out to Paul George.
Yeah, man, that was brutal. I still remember the look on Eric's face.
Oh, it's fantastic. I think we either that should be an emoji or it already is, but either way, that's all I've got. Don't go anywhere. Stay on this stream. The MLB deeper dive, which was really difficult for me to say without saying NBA right there, is coming up next. Alex is staying here. We're bringing on Greg. That was fun to do. MLB is here now officially, that the NBA season is gone, and now that I am talking about it. Good luck tonight, everybody, with your MLB contest. We'll talk to you later.
This is Awesemo, the MLB Deeper Dive. Now, Alex and I doing a baseball show together. Alex working double duty, just did a show, just enough time to take a quick break, and it's to jump right back and do another show with me. So, Alex, how you doing? You fatigued at all?
Yeah, I'm running on fumes here, but I'm excited because today, it's cool because we got some big MLB tournaments with no NBA slate. Josh and I just gave kind of a brief tutorial if you guys missed it, for if you're just warming up to MLB for the first time this season. So make sure to check that out. But also today is the first day that supposedly they're enforcing this ban on pitching substances. So I'm a little bit curious to see what's going to go on today. So I'm looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, and I did. I have a graph at the ready. Should we just bring up? Let's just bring up the graph now. Why are we gonna blue ball the audience? Let's just bring it up and we could get to it because I do think this is an interesting talking point. So, yeah, today is supposed to be the first official day that the MLB is banning any kind of substance pitchers could use, whether it be spider tack. We've seen rosin mixed with sunscreen, just different ways to get better grips on the ball. And today, supposedly, if any pitcher is caught doing this, it's an automatic 10-game suspension and there's no player that's allowed to be replacing that player on the roster. So therefore teams are, it gives teams a little bit of motivation to enforce themselves because if one of their players gets caught, they lose a roster spot for 10 days. But if you look at the data, it seems very clear that pitchers have stopped using it a couple of weeks ago. So my feeling is that baseball has kind of been under the radar, been enforcing this for the last couple of weeks, but they've made it more public now. But by the way, Jordan, can you pull up the Yu Darvish chart I sent you? Or is it on the screen already?
It's on there, yeah.
Okay. All right. So if you look at Yu Darvish's start so far for the season, starting in April, very consistently had RPMs of about 2,700 to 2,800 per start. Very consistent. It was a little slower starting the year, but that's not uncommon. We see pitchers ramp up and then, as they build up their arm strength and as the season goes on, we start to see velocity go up, RPMs go up. So once we get past the first few starts, you see that, through April through May, very consistent, 2,700 to 2,800 RPMs per pitch in each of his starts. Then his last two starts in June 9th, 26.36 was his average spin rate. And then last game was all the way down to 25.09. It was the only other game he had that was comparable to that was his second start of the year, which, like I said, second start of the year, I don't put too much into that. But considering that two of his three lowest RPMs per start were his last two, and also that he's self-admittedly been somebody who used to use some kind of sticky tack to get a better grip on the ball, I think we have a little bit of an idea for what some of these pitchers are going to look like going forward. Now, with that said, who the hell knows what this is going to mean? We know they're going to have less RPMs, and it looks like Yu Darvish, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15% less rotations on his baseballs, when he throws them. But Alex, what are we doing with this data, and how is it impacting how you're building lineups?
Yeah, that's the really tough part. Like what I was hoping for is to get a little assist from sports books. So I looked a little bit closely today to see is there any movement in the lines that we're not expecting. But the lines today look about the same on average as average day. The average over under is about 8.5. So it's nothing crazy. The strikeout props, there wasn't any movement on those. But I really feel like this is a big deal. And I think the reason they implemented this was because of all the no-hitters earlier in the season. I was watching a Turnbull one because I'm a Detroit Tigers fan. And man, he took the ball. He was rubbing his hands all over it before every pitch. It was just so obvious that this was not a nervous tick. It was him working the substance on the ball. So I really feel like it is going to have a really serious impact. The one question is we don't really know who was using it. I kind of feel like everyone was. What do you think?
It seems to me pretty clear that the majority of pitchers were using it. Now, with that said, there are certain pitchers who have not seen any kind of decrease at all in the last couple of starts. Now, does that mean they were still using it and they were waiting until the ban? That's another, variable that we're not totally sure about. But somebody like Julio Urias, who's pitching later tonight, he's had a very consistent RPM, very consistent spin rate on his pitches throughout the season. Now, the Dodgers as a whole, they have been the team that have been hit the hardest by this and seen the biggest decrease in spin rate. Trevor Bauer, Clayton Kershaw, a couple of notable examples in their last couple of starts. But It's a lot of things. It's a big thing where I just think it adds a lot of variance to an already highly variant sport. So I'm going to be paying pretty close attention to our top stacks tool, our top pitchers tool, and just kind of seeing like, hey, which pitchers are going to be really popular that maybe we have with a better chance of being, less odds of being a top scoring pitcher. Maybe it makes sense to stack against some guys that we normally wouldn't stack against, just because there's so much uncertainty here. I think it's going to matter, like you said, but how it's going to matter, it's really anybody's guess. I just think it's an interesting talking point.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great storyline. I feel like it's unprecedented to I know this wasn't a rule. Like the rule was always that this wasn't allowed, but for them to have such a change in how this rule is applied in the middle of the season, like it's really weird because we really have no concept of how it's going to affect things.
Yeah, and the other reason we also know that there's very clear evidence that this has already been going on is so Tyler Glasnow, who tore his UCL while he was pitching, was that a week and a half ago now? He had said the reason he got injured was because the MLB crackdown, he was no longer able to use the same pitching substance he used to get grip on the ball. And it changed how he had to grip some of his pitches. It changed his delivery on certain pitches. So in his mind, he got hurt because he had to make that change on the fly during the season, which, by the way, if baseball hadn't started enforcing it today, there would have been no reason for him to have to change that a couple weeks ago. So it's pretty clearly been going on, and we're definitely going to see going forward how it's going to affect some guys. But I mean, we could start talking about some of the games. And by the way, today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. And if you want to check out some of the over-unders pitcher props they have here, that is also a good way to kind of get a baseline to an expectation of how many strikeouts we'd expect some of these guys to get. So, for instance, Yu Darvish, who we just talked about, he has a slate high over-under projection on PrizePicks of 6.5 strikeouts. And guys, if you are new to PrizePicks, head on over to the site, use the promo code Awesemo, get a $100 match on your first deposit. And that's a good way to get going at PrizePicks. Free money, can't complain with that. But that is the highest total of the slate, Alex, is 6.5 strikeouts for Yu Darvish. Do you feel that maybe those numbers would have been a little bit higher had it not been for these concerns?
Let me check my numbers here. I have been using kind of like the season long numbers so far. So it sounds like it probably doesn't have much data with him not using the substance. So if we just plug in his strikeout rate for the year of 29.3%, I'm actually getting a lower number than the strikeout prop I'm seeing. I'm getting 6.2. The line I'm seeing is 6.5 with the juice on the over. So yeah, it looks like the strikeout props haven't moved at all. It would be kind of interesting, like in the most cases, like these props aren't correlated, so you can parlay them. It would be interesting to do some parlays today where like you bet all unders on pitcher props or on over unders, you bet all overs, because you might have a unnatural correlation today.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of really bad pitchers with low pitcher props today that we're going to be talking about. And so then we start talking to some of the pitchers, like the first game we have on the slate here. It is the Houston Astros taking on the Baltimore Orioles. So on one side of the game, we have Keegan Aiken, who on PrizePicks, he has a pitcher prop. His strikeout total is 3.5. Hard to feel very confident betting an under on a 3.5. Going up against the Houston Astros. Houston is going to be one of the chalkiest teams on the slate. Pitching for the Houston Astros is going to be Jake Odorizzi. So starting with Keegan Aiken, Alex, I think we have to talk about him individually. I think it's pretty easy to just discount him and take him out of the player pool. But what do we want to do with the Houston Astros going up against him as a team that's going to be garnering so much ownership on this slate?
Yeah, that's always tough when the team that's the highest owned has a really good reason to be. So that being said, Keegan Aiken this year, although he has a 5.7 ERA, his xFIP has only been 4.1. So he's not a terrible pitcher based on that. 21% strikeout rate, a little bit subpar, but nothing crazy. And then Camden Yards being 80 degrees and humid. Those are really good hitting conditions. So I think that's the main reason why Houston is really popping today. And they got some really cheap guys. So this one's one of the toughest spots where you can get some really good value hitters in great spots, but everyone else is going to be heavy on them too.
Yeah, with a lot of these spots that are really chalky, something I like to do personally is I'll try to find a hitter that I think might have upside that individually isn't picking up a lot of ownership. For example, last week in Coors Field, I'm pretty sure that the Padres played in Coors Field last week. Everybody in their lineup was 20 to 30% on, with the exception being Jerickson Profar. He was like 5-6% owned in a lot of those games. So he seemed like a reasonable way for me to differentiate a lot of my Padres stacks. One of the issues with the Astros today is that everybody's popular. Only Miles Straw right now is projected for 8% ownership. Beyond that, every single hitter we have here is projected for a pretty significant amount of ownership. Like you said, a lot of it has to do with the pricing. We have Abraham Toro. He's going to be starting in place of Alex Bregman today. Bregman on the injured list. So we have Toro, who's right around min price on both FanDuel and DraftKings, is projected to be somebody who's north of 20% owned. So it's really hard to find a spot to differentiate the stack. For me, in these spots, I always mention I rely pretty heavily on our top stacks tool that we have on the site. And for today, we do have the Astros really by far the best odds of being the top stack on the slate. We have them with a 24% chance. And the next highest team is the Cincinnati Reds with a 13% chance. So I still want to get to the Houston Astros. I'm just not quite willing to get to the 28% ownership share that the field's on currently, because that's a little bit of negative leverage there. So are you kind of in the same boat as me where you're going to be getting to the Astros, but maybe just quite not as much as the field? Or are you still going to be around the field?
I do find when the ownership gets this high that it can be worth a fade, even though it feels wrong to fade the best team that's cheap. But if you gotta think like, okay, so the ownership's about 26% on DraftKings and 25% on FanDuel. That's like of all the batters. So because you can stack two teams in each lineup, that means like almost half of lineups are going to have Houston or exposure, which is a ridiculous amount. So it just makes sense at some point that like if you're just kind of taking the under on the Houston line of 6.5 projected runs, if they score 6 runs, like there's a good chance like there won't be any crazy fancy performances. Even if they get 7 or 8, probably okay. So I'm willing to take some chances. One of my preferred ways to get a little different is like everyone's going to the value players on Houston. So you could just spend up on all the expensive guys, which would be Altuve, Gurriel, Yordan Alvarez, and Carlos Correa. But the problem is like they're still super high owned. So I don't really see any great path with this team, although it's hard to argue that they're the best stack today without considering ownership.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. It's definitely the best stack. It's just there's a lot of ownership and there's no reasonable way to differentiate. I did see somebody in the YouTube chat. It was William McGuire brought up that there's a storm coming in through Baltimore that's pushing him away from that game. For me personally, there's nothing I see right now that's too much of an issue. There is a slight chance of rain, except from what I saw, it's a 30% chance of rain. And even if it does rain, there'd be a chance to play it later in the night. It's not like it's supposed to rain the entire day. So I am aware of the weather there, but nothing like that right now that I see is massively concerning to me. Do you see anything differently with the weather, Alex?
So I see the severe thunderstorm watch until 10 p.m. But the thing I'm seeing on the radar is it's a very narrow band of storms, about 1 hour long. So I think what we're seeing in the model is they don't know exactly what time this is going to pass through. Which is why each hour has a lower percent chance of precipitation. But I just don't expect it to last long enough to severely impact the game. I feel like even if there's looks like maybe they would delay to start and play. And I think that would work pretty well. But even if they started and then delayed after 1 hour, that's not usually long enough to ice the pitchers, but always a concern.
Yeah, I can't say it's zero risk because, well, number one, it's baseball. Teams do weird things all the time. We see games where it doesn't even rain that they end up canceling it, but it's not anything that's altering my ownership for this particular slate. And whether you went much deeper with the weather than I was expecting, I was just kind of thinking like, hey, risk, no risk, how's it affecting your lineups? Instead, we got a whole meteorology report. We got a breakdown of the weather radar. So I love all that. But starting at pitching for the Houston Astros, we have Jake Odorizzi, one of the value options on the slate. So Odorizzi this year, his ERA isn't all that great, 5.68, but the underlying numbers do suggest a better pitcher. He has a 3.88 expected ERA. He's been done in by a lot of bad sequencing this year, so he has a 60.9% strand rate. And more often than not, we expect the strand rate to be, much higher. For his career, he has a 74.1% strand rate. So him having a 60.9% strand rate, it's not anything he's doing that should make him have a lower strand rate. It's just that he's gotten unlucky. It's bad sequencing. Guys have gotten more hits when guys have been on base than guys getting hits when there aren't hitters on base. So I do expect Odorizzi to get much better going forward. He's not necessarily my favorite pitcher or anything like that, but for 5,900 on DraftKings, I think he's worth looking at as an SP2. Single pitcher slates on FanDuel, no reason for me to go there, but Odorizzi, what do you make of him as a potential SP2 option on DK, Alex?
I think he's all right. The matchup versus Baltimore, they actually have gotten better this year, and they don't strike out a ton. So let's say coupled with the weather, it's probably a below average spot for Odorizzi. The other thing I'm worried about is the pitching substance thing, because there has been a really big trend of pitchers going to Houston and then becoming aces out of nowhere. So I feel like their substances were the best of any team. But, we'll see how that plays out. I think he's a fine pitcher, but just because of the park and the weather, probably not a great option tonight.
So then with that in mind, on the other side of the game, Jake Odorizzi, like I said, while he does have decent underlying numbers, he still does have a 5.68 ERA this year. And his FIP is a little bit higher than his expected ERA. So, it does look like he should maintain having a 5.68 ERA, but, I do like to use the Zips projections as a baseline. They do have him projected for a 4.45 ERA going forward. So, certainly not a terrible pitcher, but not great by any means either. But given the favorable hitting conditions, are the Baltimore Orioles a team that you're looking to stack?
I think they're pretty good. Yeah, the ownership's a lot lower than Houston. One thing I didn't mention in our last show is that stacking the home team is always a little less enticing than the away team, because if the team scores 10 runs, you're only getting 8 innings instead of 9. But it does look like the prices are good on Baltimore. The spot versus Odorizzi is appealing. The weather is great. So I think it's intriguing. Doesn't look like super high owned, so I think you got the workings of a pretty good stack here.
Yeah, unfortunately, so earlier in the day when I was doing the strategy show with Spags, I liked the Orioles as a stack, and I thought there was also really good ways to differentiate, because even though it's a team that, it looks about appropriately owned in our top stacks tool, there were some individual hitters that I really liked a lot that looked like they were going under-owned that have since come up since then. So Cedric Mullins was somebody early in the day was projecting for like 3 or 4% ownership. Now he's up to 11%. By the way, Cedric Mullins is second in all of the American League in Fangraphs WAR, only behind Vladimir Guerrero Jr. So Cedric Mullins has been, he's been low key really good this year. So I looked at him, favorable spot 4,600 with single digit ownership, and he looked to me like one of the better contrarian options on the slate as a one-off hitter. But now that his ownership's come up, it's just more of a neutral play at 11% owned. The one guy that does stand out to me as being kind of egregiously owned, although not really that crazy, is Freddie Galvis, 14% owned for him. That does seem really high for somebody like Freddie Galvis. So if you do want to make a really contrarian Oriole stack, for me personally, I think the easiest way to do it is just leave Freddie Galvis out, because he's generally a subpar hitter, but he finds himself, because of his price point and position, to be the most rostered player on the Orioles. So that's my lean right now. I do like the Orioles as a stack, and I think if you want to make it different, take Freddie Galvis out, and Cedric Mullins is definitely my favorite player as a core piece of the Orioles stacks. All right, the next game here, we have the Oakland A's taking on the Texas Rangers. So Frankie Montas, one of the ace pitchers on the slate, and then Kyle Gibson, one of the other value options that is viable to us today. So starting with Frankie Montas, a guy not shy to cheat, a guy he's been suspended for PED use. So to this point, we haven't seen a major drop off in his spin rate compared to some other guys, but, does have a PED violation on his record. So, maybe that means that he is somebody who could see a significant decrease in spin rate going forward. But Alex, what do you make of Frankie Montas as one of the pay up options on the slate today?
Well, his baseline isn't like the highest, because he's not a terrific strikeout pitcher, about average at 24%. But the matchup versus Texas, they have a pretty weak lineup today, and they have a pretty good amount of Ks in there. So the matchup is very solid. I think I saw that Globe Life has a closed roof today, which explains why the over-under is only 8. So I think the weather conditions, since the roof's closed, should be solid for pitching. So I think he's a decent option, but because his baseline isn't that high, I'm not overly excited about paying mid 9Ks for him.
Yeah, I have one question for you because this is something that I always kind of wonder about. So Frankie Montas, he was hurt for a lot of last year, and he's dealt with a lot of injuries. He's dealt with PED suspension in the past. He got off to a little bit of a slow start this year. So if you do look at his numbers, there is a pretty significant difference as the season went on. Although not in his K rate, but some of his other underlying numbers. Really, the actual big difference when he's throwing a lot more strikes now. So Frankie Montas had a 4.47 xFIP in March and April. In May, he had a 3.99 xFIP. And now in June, he has a 2.98 xFIP. Now, obviously, a lot of these are small sample size going month by month, but there is some signs of improvement. How is that something that you might weigh over the course of a season where a pitcher seems to be making notable improvements as the season goes on?
So I think it's always worth weighing the more recent data more than older data. The tricky part is usually that's the kind of lean that everyone has. So sometimes people overcorrect. So I'd say, maybe weight that a little bit more, but overall, like the season long numbers are usually the best metric to look at, especially for strikeout rate, because that converges pretty quickly. But that's one area where you can get an edge if you really apply like your baseball knowledge to find spots that maybe people aren't adjusting for.
All right. And then on the other side, we do have the Texas Rangers, who we only have as the 4% chance of being top stack on the slate. That is the third lowest on the slate, looking about appropriately owned. So Frankie Montas is also going to be popular on the slate. Are you looking to get any leverage off him potentially by stacking the Texas Rangers?
I think the Rangers are one of the lower tier stacks today, but the ownership is super low too. So I think Montas he's been having a pretty good year. 3.7 xFIP is above average. Conditions aren't great for bats, so we can just one of the lower projected stacks today, and they just don't have a lot of good batters either. Only a couple of guys that have any above average power. So it's hard to get excited, but it's baseball, so like anything can happen.
Yeah, one thing I will say is that Joey Gallo, early in the day, his ownership projected has come down from about 12% to 7%. If you want to take a one-off hitter, Joey Gallo is always about as likely to hit a home run as anybody on the slate, so that makes sense. But once again, Texas Rangers, if you're playing 150 lineups, it's fine having the player pool. If you're playing 1, 3, 10 lineups, anything like that, Texas Rangers is not one of the teams that I would personally be considering. But one player that we do have to consider from the Texas Rangers is going to be their pitcher, Kyle Gibson today, who also is somebody who looks like one of the better options on the low end of the pricing range on DraftKings. So Kyle Gibson this year has had stats way out of line with what we've seen the last couple of years. So Kyle Gibson this year, 2.09 ERA, 3.13 expected ERA, very significant improvements over what we saw the last couple of years, but yet he still remains fairly cheap from a DFS perspective. So do you think that Kyle Gibson is a good source of salary savings today?
Well, Oakland is a pretty good team. They have pretty solid power today, about 20% more extra bases than your average team, and they don't strike out a ton. But Kyle Gibson, as you're saying, has been having a good year, and he's pretty cheap. So I'm actually a little bit surprised that he's going to be somewhat popular at 21% ownership, but he looks like as good a pitcher as any if you have that amount of salary left to just click in.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that look this. Number one, just because of the price point and how weak the pitching options are, I kind of think Kyle Gibson becomes a little bit inevitable if you're looking to save salary, because Kyle Gibson 6,300 on DraftKings, Jake Odorizzi 5,900, then he gets J.A. Happ, who's 5,300, Keegan Aiken 5,100, Brett Anderson 6,500. So I think the other guys in that price range, Gibson makes more sense then. But also, given how good the Oakland A's offense is, and also that they do appear to be the most under-owned team on our top stacks tool, and it does look like Gibson's a little bit over-owned, this is a situation I want to play both sides of it. I want to play Kyle Gibson in lineups just because of the salary savings, but I also want to leverage off him by getting to Oakland A's stacks, just because for an offense that's this good, there should just be more ownership going to them. And we have them with only 3.4% ownership. The only teams with less ownership in the Oakland A's today are the Los Angeles Dodgers, who are going up against Yu Darvish, the Texas Rangers against Frankie Montas, and then the Cleveland Indians, who are going up against Adbert Alzolay. So, there's a pretty big difference here. Number one, I think Oakland arguably has a better offense than all those teams other than the Dodgers, and they have a much easier matchup. So I think the A's are one of the most under-owned teams on the slate. Is that something you agree with?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, it's almost it's almost too obvious, I'd say, because like the ownership's about half the chance we have of being the top stack, and what we're seeing is they're just overpriced. So that's something in baseball where I'm not really worried about points per dollar as much. There's about 8% chance that Oakland will be the highest scoring stack. If they are, it's like almost a lock that you're going to need to stack Oakland and just have the two remaining pitchers that fit with that stack that do the best. So that's one spot. It looks like it makes a lot of sense to bet on.
Yeah, that's definitely a team that I'm going to be really high on right now. The build that I have, and it's never final for me until all the lineups come in. But as of right now, that's the team I'm most overweight to, and that's also what I think most people should be doing, just based on our top stacks. So it's something I rely on very heavily, and Oakland rates out really well there from a leverage perspective. So give me the Oakland A's today as the contrarian team to stack up, and hopefully that's what wins me the GPPs today. And the next game we have here, there's also a little bit of a storyline here. We have the Cleveland Indians taking on the Chicago Cubs. Aaron Savali pitching up against Adbert Alzolay. So Alzolay is a pretty interesting case today because he's somebody who's pitched really well when he's been on the mound this year. And we also have the wind blowing in pretty significantly at Wrigley Field. We know that's always a pretty big factor. And we have currently winds expected to be blowing in at about 12 miles per hour in from left center field, which is definitely going to limit the offense. It's one of the reasons we have such a low total in this game. The game total is only set at 7 runs. That is by tied for the lowest on the slate with the Padres and Dodgers, and then no other game is really all that close. So not a lot of runs expected to be scored. But with that said, Alzolay has not pitched in a couple of weeks. He's coming off the injured list. He's dealing with a blister issue. And as is, the Cubs have been pretty conservative with how deep they've been allowing him to work into games. So how are you considering all these factors, Alex? Alzolay, it seems to be a pretty good spot. There aren't many good pitching options. Then he also has the blister injury. So what do you make of him as a play?
Man, I get nervous when you say the word blister from years of rostering Rich Hill. But in general, if a guy has only missed like 1 or 2 starts, I usually think they're a full go. For Alzolay, he had only been going about 80 pitches anyway, so I don't expect a pitch count here. So I think he's interesting to take a shot on. 27% strikeout rate this year. As you mentioned, the conditions in Wrigley are favorable, and Cleveland's only projected for 3.6 runs. So this all comes down to how you're weighing this injury, because he looks like a pretty good play otherwise. It looks like he's a little bit low owned. So are you expecting him to be a full go today, or are you a little bit concerned?
No, I was really hoping we were going to get beat reported news by now, because I'd said earlier where it was kind of one of those things where I was like, hey, I'm going to kick the can down the road, and hopefully I could find a story where a beat reporter says like, hey, Alzolay's expected to throw X amount of pitches. And then by the time that we start our show, I'd be like, hey, I have updated information. I could really give a strong take on how I feel about Alzolay, and nothing's come out. So I'm still hoping we get something, although at this point it kind of seems like it's going to be one of those situations where he goes out and pitches, and then we'll know after the start ends. And we'll either feel really smart or really stupid, because we'll go like, hey, look, Alzolay, I knew he wasn't going to throw very many pitches because of the blister. Be like, oh, I should have known that he was going to be unrestricted. So my kind of lean on a lot of these situations where I'm really not sure and don't have a really good feel for it, I'll more often than not just kind of go with whatever our tools have as somebody's chances of being a top pitcher. So, right now I'd have Alzolay in somewhere around a quarter of my lineups, just because it's what our tools say. And it's really hard for me to make an individual judgment for myself when I think there's unknowable information here. And it's possible the Cubs don't even know. They might just go out and see how he feels, how he looks on the mound. And then if he's going well, they'll let him go his normal pitches. Maybe they take him out early otherwise. But that's generally what I'm probably going to do here, having about a quarter of my lineups. Do you think that seems reasonable?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's a good point, that the team may not really know ahead of time what they're going to do with him. So especially with the blister, that is concerning. High volatility spot. So this is one more way you can fail. But if you're somewhat within that ownership percentage we're expecting from the field, that kind of insulates you from any risk one way or the other.
Yeah, and by the way, also just as a spoiler for later, that's kind of what I'm expecting to do with Yu Darvish today too. Just because there's so much uncertainty there with him and the decrease in spin rate. That's another one where it's like, hey, you know what? I don't know what's going to happen with Yu Darvish. I'm just going to align myself with the field, and my night will be made or broken elsewhere. But then stacking in this game, talking about the offenses, it's hard for me to really have interest in the Cubs or the Indians just based on all that wind that's blowing in, and we know how much that factors at Wrigley Field. So I don't really think I'm going to be getting to the offense as much here, but are you ever willing to get to the Wrigley offenses when there's strong wind blowing in from center field?
I think it's worth considering just because any team pretty much has the potential to just string a lot of hits together. But it looks like the prices are very high on these guys, and the chance that they're the top stack is very low. So this is really taking from the bottom of the barrel. I think like in this kind of situation where you have a bad team that's overpriced, you can make a lineup that's decent, but you probably have better opportunities with the other 10 teams on the slate.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. It's there's just not a lot of offensive potential, and certainly not potential for home runs as much at Wrigley when the wind is blowing in. But then on the other side of the game, we have Aaron Savali pitching for the Indians, and he's going to be benefiting from the same conditions that Azalea is benefiting from. The only thing with Savali is, and the reason that I'm not all that interested in him, he's fairly expensive on both FanDuel and DraftKings, 8,500 on DK, 8,000 on FanDuel, and there just isn't a lot of strikeout upside here, and it's a fairly difficult matchup. So to me, I look at a lot of the other pitchers in this price range, and I'd rather get to them. I'd rather pay up for Darvish, Urias, Tyler Mahle, Frankie Montas, Azalea. All these guys are higher priorities for me than Aaron Savali, where Savali is a guy who, he's a pretty good pitcher, but it doesn't really translate to DFS as well when he's a 17.3% strikeout rate. So what kind of upside do you think somebody like Savali has here?
So, I think you hit all the key points where he's not a great strikeout pitcher, but he is benefiting from this weather. Having the upside to just go really deep in the game is enough to get there in fantasy, especially when there's only 12 pitchers. And the price seems fairly reasonable on DraftKings and FanDuel. FanDuel's scoring system does benefit guys that can make it 6 innings or more. And Savali seems like one of the more likely to do that in the league because he's averaging like 100 pitches, basically. I have him going about as deep as anyone in games. And the Cubs lineup this year has been a little disappointing. So when the weather is kind of stacked against them too, it does make the pitcher seem appealing, but I wouldn't be expecting a lot of strikeouts here.
And then I'll ask you then, because the show is sponsored by PrizePicks. PrizePicks, you want to go there. Different way to play DFS. You could build some lineups, build some cards based on strikeout props for players. Also, if you're new to PrizePicks, use the promo code Awesemo, make a deposit, get up to $100 match on that first deposit. So at PrizePicks, Aaron Savali has an over-under of 5 strikeouts. Now, we just said he's not a very high strikeout guy, but the Cubs are a team that strike out a lot. And Savali is going to have more opportunities to strike out guys just because he works deeper into the games. So what do you think of that 5.0 strikeout line over at PrizePicks?
Yeah, I think that one's spot on. I have him at 5.3 on average. So I think he will average about 5 as a median. So on PrizePicks, that's not a problem. You can just look at the next prop and find one that you do feel like you have an edge on. So it's going to be all about kind of figuring out the best one. I also like they let you like do it across different sports. Like you can have a parlay with like WNBA, NASCAR, and MLB. You gotta love that.
Yeah, so we had you could combine Frankie Montas's strikeouts with how many saves Andre Vasilevsky will have tonight in hockey, and there you go. You build yourself a PrizePicks card. So here we are now halfway through the games. Got about 20 minutes left, 3 games to go, and next team up, actually one of my favorite offense to look up on the slate, to stack up on the slate. We have Jay Happ pitching against the Cincinnati Reds, and Happ this year has been hapless, I guess we'll say. That's probably what's most apt
God.
here, because he's not been good at all. He's somebody who used to be a quality starting pitcher, but it's all gone downhill for him recently, especially this year. The velocity is down 90.9 average mile per hour fastball velocity. To me, that's always a concern when you see an older pitcher who, number one, is giving up a lot more runs, but then also see decline in velocity, see decline in strikeout rate. All of that to me signifies a pretty significant decrease in overall arm talent. So 6.12 ERA for J Happ this year, and then a 5.23 expected ERA. I've really, really liked the Cincinnati Reds today. Also, personally, a bet that I have for this slate, I bet this morning the Cincinnati Reds for over 4.5 runs. I'm going to be stacking them. I like this team a lot. The ownership to me is, there are some popular hitters, but overall it's in check. So, Alex, what do you think happens to Happ, and will the Reds get to him today?
Man, so many puns. I just can't get over the fact this guy goes by J Happ instead of J Happ. It's like, do people call PJ Tucker P Tucker? Actually, that's kind of cool. Anyway,
so it's weird. His name is actually J, but it's just spelled wrong. Like they spell like it's. I don't know why they spell it that way. It's J period A period, but pronounced J. It's just he spelled a very simple. It could just be J the letter, and they spelled it wrong.
Man, that's next level. So yeah, he seems like one of the weaker starters on the slate. The weather in Minnesota is a little chilly tonight at 63. Not what you'd expect on the longest day of the year, but the thing I love about Cincinnati tonight is, like, although it looks like their ownership might be high at first glance, it's actually relatively low on their best players, and including, well, not all the best players, but three of their best players: Jonathan India, Jesse Winker, and Joey Votto all look like they're a little bit overpriced, which is going to drive away the ownership. Votto and Winker have a lefty-lefty matchup. People hate that. But when you stack a team, you're hoping that starting pitcher doesn't go very deep in the game in the first place. So I think the Red stack makes a lot of sense here.
Yeah, I like them. And also something that you mentioned there is actually something that I said to Spags this morning when I did the strategy show with him is, so, all right, Jesse Winker has been one of the best hitters in baseball, one of the best power hitters in baseball all this season. And even though he's been much better against right-handed pitching and left-handed pitching, he still has an above 100 WRC plus against lefties. So that's still above league average. And the other thing too, Happ has been so bad this year. Right, if I stack the Reds and Happ pitches 6 innings, the stack sucked anyway, right? So Jesse Winker, I'm thinking there's a pretty good chance if a Red stack works out, Winker's probably facing a right-handed pitcher in like the 4th or 5th inning. So to me, I look at some of these individual hitters. Jesse Winker, 5% projected ownership. Joey Votto, 2% projected ownership. That's a really good way to differentiate an otherwise fairly popular stack. So that is a route that I'm going to be going down pretty heavily today. And it kind of seems like you're on the same page with me with some of those lefties.
I like that logic. And what we can expect in lefty-lefty matchups is when they do have that lefty-lefty matchup, it does lead to about 25% less extra bases. So that is pretty significant. When you take 25% of his ISO of 27%, like you're still left with a power rating that's like well above the league average. So I think if the ownership is low, I mean, there's really no reason not to go with Winker, which is seems like not what the field is doing today.
Yeah, and then pitching on the other side, an actual pitcher that I really do like, Tyler Mahle, who's been on not just a really good real life pitcher, but even for fantasy perspective, because his strikeout rate, he's been a guy right around 30% K rate this year and last year. So we're not just looking at a 1-year sample size where Mahle's been good. He's been really good going back to last year. And also something I really like about him, more so on DraftKings than FanDuel. FanDuel single pitcher site, he looks about appropriately owned. But on DraftKings right now, we have Tyler Mahle, 13% projected ownership, but a 25.6% chance to be a top pitcher. I think the top end of the pitching tier today, a lot of these guys look fairly similar odds to be a top scoring pitcher. Yu Darvish, Julio Urias, Tyler Mahle, Frankie Montas, Adbert Alzolay. The difference between these guys is that Mahle has about a half to a third the ownership of a lot of these guys. So with that in mind, I want to be really heavy on Mahle. That's the guy who I'm really sticking to as my favorite high-end option, just because I view a lot of these guys similarly. And the difference is he's much lower owned. It is a tough matchup against the Twins, but Mahle's pitched really well this year. So give me him because I have concerns about pretty much all of the high-end guys.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota does have a good lineup. I have them about 25% more extra bases than the average team. However, the weather of 64 degrees is a plus, and also the park the Twins play in is not that great for bats in general. So even considering the average temperatures. So I feel like Mlb, if all the ownership's going away from him because of the price tag, he does make a lot of sense today.
Yeah, and that's really what it is. If somebody was to ask me who are the best plays today at pitcher, I'd say like I don't have a really strong lean on the top end guys. I think they're all similar, but then we just have one guy who's projected for way less ownership. So, like I said, I'm going to Tyler Mahle today. I think that he is a good pitcher to roster. But on the other side, do you have any interest in stacking against him, given how good Mahle is pitched and some of the weather conditions not being as great as the other spots?
I think it's fine because of the talent level of the Twins. I don't want to appear like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here, but I do. In baseball, there are a lot of spots where I'll take stab from both teams. The main thing with the Twins is just the ownership is somewhat low for the talent. So I think you can make a stack work, but it wouldn't be my first choice though.
Yeah, and the other thing to consider here too is that Nelson Cruz, he left yesterday's game early with an injury. He might be out of the lineup. That would potentially make this, a little bit more favorable spot for Tyler Mahle. One thing that does kind of stand out to me, just looking at the individual ownerships, Byron Buxton, who's been really good this year, and especially from a fantasy perspective because of his power and speed upside, but he's projected for nearly 20% ownership today. That seems like a lot of ownership going to one guy who, even though he's been, good for the Twins, it's a tough matchup against Mahle. So if you are making a twin stack, once again, I think one of the easiest ways to differentiate is don't play Byron Buxton. Somebody's going to be in about 20% of the field's lineups and is in a tough spot because beyond him, there's a lot of much lower owned hitters right now, like Jorge Polanco, Josh Donaldson, Alex Kirilloff, Miguel Sano, Trevor Larnach. All these guys are projected for single digit ownership. So there definitely are ways if you're playing a lot of Mahle and maybe you're a little concerned about the quality of the Twins offense. You can make a pretty good low-owned leverage stack. And you never know. Sometimes it happens in baseball where you'll be really high on a pitcher and the pitcher will suck, but then you have like two stacks against him and one of those stacks hits, and that makes the entire night anyway. So I don't think it's something I'm going to be doing a ton on this slate, but it is something that makes sense if you want to be more risk adverse here. Next, yeah, go ahead.
The situations where you want to do that are with the high strikeout pitchers because like the strikeouts are really what drives the projection, and it doesn't necessarily mean the stack's a lot less likely to hit. So those are the times you want to play both sides.
Yeah, and for reference right now, the Top Stacks tool, which is something, like I said, I really like. I use a lot to build my baseball lineups. We currently have the Twins with about an 8% ownership and a 7% chance to be a top stack on the slate. And if this is something that you guys would like access to, you could sign up for an Awesemo Plus membership, weekly pass, $29.95. That encompasses all the DFS sports. But if you're a new user of Awesemo Plus and you're looking to take advantage of a promo code we have going right now for this show specifically, use the promo code MLB Live Before Lock, all caps. That is one word, MLB Live Before Lock. That is 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. And if you're looking to just play MLB DFS, you can sign up for an MLB Plus. It's well, I don't know if anybody can hear Jordan right now or just me, but in the sheet that I was sent, this is also the promo code for the show. All right, anyway, so promo code MLB Live Before Lock, that'll get you 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum. But if you're looking just for the MLB package, only play MLB, that is $15.95 for an MLB DFS weekly package. So there we go. If you're looking to get access to the MLB Top Stacks tool and use some of the numbers that Alex and I are looking at to build lineups, that is how you could go about and do that. Next game on the slate, we've got two left to talk about here. The Milwaukee Brewers taking on the Arizona Diamondbacks. One of the weaker starting pitching options on the slate, in my opinion, on the Milwaukee side, Brett Anderson. Although he did have a good outing recently, in general, Brett Anderson is somebody who pitches to a lot of contact, generates ground balls, not a whole lot of strikeouts. So as a result, not a lot of fantasy appeal when he's somebody last 3 years, 14.6% K rate, 15.8% K rate, and then 12.1% K rate for Brett Anderson. So Alex, with that in mind, is Brett Anderson, because of the price point, somebody you might be willing to get to?
And I was shocked last game when he got like 8 strikeouts because like maybe he just decided to use pitching substance for like one last time or something, and he doesn't usually use it. This guy just doesn't strike anyone out. So it is a really tough thing because usually like pitching like strikeouts do converge pretty quick. So this 8 is really an outlier, but it's just hard to trust him today. And the weather here is insane. It's like 108 degrees in Arizona today. And I guess the roof is going to be open. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. But if true, then this is going to be very favorable to bats.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. And that was also something that we brought up on the strategy show this morning, is that there is expected to be as of now, the roof is supposed to be open. It's supposed to be really hot out. So if that's the case, we've seen in the past, Arizona kind of turns into a light version of Coors Field when it's really hot and the roof is open. So that is something that usually you wouldn't think is being that important of information for DFS. In this spot, I really think it is. I think the roof being open, that would create for incredible favorable hitting environments. It would make me want to stack up both teams. Now, with that said, going up against Brett Anderson, the Arizona Diamondbacks, we do have them fairly negatively leveraged, 7% chance of being a top stack, 11.3% ownership share. But given how poorly Anderson has pitched this year and the potential favorable hitting conditions, what do you make of the Diamondbacks as a stack? Do you want to be overweight to the field on them, with the field, or maybe underweight because of the ownership expected?
So we did just get a note from EMAC. The roof is closed today. So he actually sent us this link from MLB.com. So that's a good one to refer to. But the over under of this game is still 9.5. So it does seem pretty appealing. Arizona's lineup is pretty terrible. I'd say they're one of the weaker ones in the league, but they're cheap too, and the over under is really high. So I don't hate taking some stabs on them, but it does look like they're kind of a trap stack with the ownership.
Yeah, and now that we know that the roof is going to be closed too, at least earlier in the day, there was reports that the roof was expected to be open when I was doing the strategy show. But now that EMAC has supplied us with the information there about the roof, that makes me feel a little bit weaker about them as a stack option. I don't think they're quite as strong of a play, especially considering all the ownership's going there. So it looks like as long as that's the case, I'm going to be looking to be underweight to the field on Arizona. Well, I still think it's a good spot. It's just the ownership already is over accounting for how good of a spot it is. Like I said, 11% chance to be a top, 11% ownership share compared to a 7% chance being a top stack. So I might be looking to go elsewhere with my stacks. One of the teams that I am going to be looking to is the other side of the game here, Milwaukee Brewers, another team very positively leveraged. They look like a team to get overweight to the field on. So the Milwaukee Brewers, they're going to be going up against Merrill Kelly, who has not been great this year, not terrible either, but he's also been pretty inconsistent. But the Brewers, just based on the amount of positive leverage we have going to them, I think this is a team that kind of like the Oakland A's, the Cincinnati Reds. I think these are one of the core teams to build around.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Merrill Kelly, pretty average pitcher, so this is definitely a team we can target. Milwaukee has a couple of really good batters, but it looks like everyone's like slightly like average, below average, besides Yelich and I guess Vogelbach. That means like everyone can have that upside of hitting a home run, like all of them steal a few bags. So no one individually I'm super excited about, but the potential is pretty solid. This one, it does look like the ownership's a lot higher on FanDuel because the prices are a lot lower. On DraftKings, they're kind of in this sweet spot where they're a little bit too high priced, but not too bad, which drives the ownership down just enough that you can get an edge. Yeah,
Christian Yelich, one of my favorite pay-up options. Dan Vogelbach, also you mentioned him, a lefty with a lot of power upside. I think that he's somebody who has potential to hit a home run. And then, some of the other guys, if we get down the order, Avisel Garcia, single-digit ownership there, Luis Urias, Willy Adames. These are all guys who do look like they're going pretty under-owned, guys 3-6% projected ownership. So given some of the tools we have on the site, this looks like a team that is a fairly high priority for me, and neither of the pitchers really look to be like they're in a terrific spot. So it's going to be the offense that I'm looking to here. And then a couple of pitchers now that warrant a lot of discussion here. In the final game of the slate, the San Diego Padres taking on the Los Angeles Dodgers. So we have Julio Urias going up against Yu Darvish. We talked at length at the start of the show about Yu Darvish and some uncertainty about his spin rate and what he might look like going forward. Now, with it said, a lot of these guys, I still think they're going to be good going forward. It's just going to be a case of how much will their strikeout rate potentially decline, and then will some of these ace starting pitchers go from being, like maybe a top 5 pitcher in the league to a top 15 pitcher in the league, and that might affect their fantasy output. So for me, starting with you, Darvish, my stance here is just whatever the field does. I have no clue what to make of Darvish. I don't have a good read on it. I'm just going to be kind of aligning myself with the field. But Alex, do you feel any stronger about Darvish and some of the concerns about his spin rate?
Well, I'm about as concerned as every pitcher because I feel like the use of this is like so widespread. But knowing for certain that he did use it is a little bit more of a data point than some other guys. Now, the Dodgers is never a matchup that's going to work in someone's favor. Their projected lineup today has above average power and below average strikeouts. And coupled with the high ownership on Darvish, it feels like a spot where maybe you can get away with going cheaper at pitcher and spending up on some low end bats instead. But the weather in San Diego is always good for pitchers, 64 degrees today, more of the same. So I think he's probably the highest projected pitcher, but compared to his price tag, I'm not going to go out of my way to get him.
Yeah, it's going to be a thing where, hey, if I'm paying up for these pitchers, like I think all these guys are kind of in the same basket. You Darvish, Julio Urias, Tyler Mahle, Frankie Montas, Albert Alzolay. The reason I'd said before that I lean towards Mahle is just because his ownership is so much less than those other guys right now. You Darvish still projected about fair, maybe a little bit overowned, but we could see he's still a much better quality of pitcher than some of these other guys overall. It's just the concern of, number one, the matchup more than anything. The Dodgers have one of the best offenses in baseball. And then also some of the spin rate issues. If not for that, I'd probably be a lot higher on Darvish on the slate. But once again, for me, he's going to be in somewhere around a third of my lineups, and I'll make other spots make or break my night. But other side of the game here, we have Julio Urias, who he's been somebody who's maintained a fairly consistent spin rate throughout the month. But the one concern we have here is going to be pitch count, because the Dodgers have been really conservative with Julio Urias and how long they've been allowing him to pitch into games. So as a result, Urias this year, pulling up his pitch counts, he's only thrown over 100 pitches once the entire year. He's only gone over 90 a few times. How much do you think that hampers his upside?
Well, I think there aren't a ton of most pitchers don't usually go 100. So it is a little bit surprising he hasn't gone to 100 in any game this season. But averaging around 80, high 80s is not that much different than the other pitchers on the slate. He's been having a good season. I know he had a few rough ones, but this year so far, 27% K rate, 3.3 xFIP, very solid. The matchup versus San Diego is a little bit below average because they got a good team, but I think that the price is about where it should be, so I have no problem with Urias.
Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to add to Urias is I don't think we've gotten the Padres lineup yet today. No, it's last game of the slate, but Fernando Tatis did leave a game early over the weekend with a shoulder issue. For now, manager Jay Singler did say after Sunday's game that he thinks that Tatis will be able to return to the lineup on Monday, but he's not positive about that. If Tatis is out, he's an MVP candidate this year. I think he's actually the betting favorite at most books right now to win MVP, just because of some of the concerns with Jacob deGrom and his health. But if he's out of the lineup, this becomes a much more favorable matchup for Urias, and that actually would pretty significantly change my outlook on him. But right now, I don't have a massive amount of Urias. I'm kind of right around the field where he's in a quarter of my lineups. But definitely somebody who I'd be looking to if we find out, say 8:30, a couple hours before the game starts, something like that Fernando Tatis is out of the lineup. I would actually be looking to move some of my Yu Darvish exposure over to Urias, just because I think that would become a more favorable matchup. How often do you do something like that? Say after lock and a team comes out with really a weaker lineup than expected. How much will that change your exposure from a late swap perspective?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Usually I'm just going in and hand swapping, so probably not taking as much advantage of it as I could. I know you can use like late swap optimizer on FC. For baseball, it's a little bit trickier to like keep your lineups with the same construction. So that is a possible way you can get an edge, is if the lineups are significantly different than people are expecting after a lock, then you can kind of exploit that by figuring out how that changes, what the optimal strategies are.
All right, just about 90 seconds left to go here. So final thoughts, Alex, and any interest in stacking the offenses against you, Darvish or Julio Urias?
I think the weather isn't great. The pitchers are solid. It's baseball, so you can definitely take some shots. The Dodgers look like no one's going to be on them, so I don't hate it, especially if you believe in this Yu Darvish spin fall off. So, but I'm not excited about it.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I'm going to take a couple shots on the Dodgers as a stack just because of some concerns, like maybe Darvish will really significantly drop off, but not something I'm expecting, just something I think there's some uncertainty here. There might be a chance, but I mean, once again, I think we're going to be in like 3 or 4% out of 150 lineups. So nothing really crazy to go with exposure there. But guys, that is going to do it for Alex and I today on the Deeper Dive Show. But baseball content is not over, because coming up next, we do have MLB Live Before Lock. So stick around for that. If you're not done so already, hit the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Jordan, play the music out.
Wong, Vogelbach, Yelich, Garcia, Narvaez, Adames, Urias, Bradley. Exactly what we thought it was, so it's fine.
What is up, guys? It is time for a little MLB Live Before Lock, where the lineups are coming in hot and heavy right as we're starting the show, and that's, of course, just where you want us to be as hosts. But I am Chris Spags, joined by a man who I've seen many times in the NBA streets, but he's here with me once again to walk through all the finer points of today's MLB slate. He's Eric Lindquist. How you doing, Eric?
Doing well. I'm ready to rock. It's again, it's strange not to have any NBA going on whatsoever tonight. Get to focus on one thing. 6 gamers, so a little bit smaller than the MLB slates I'm accustomed to playing, but nevertheless, the money is still going to spend exactly the same. So let's go win it.
We're going to be talking to, oh boy, close up of Jordan Klein there. Moving. He was getting up from his computer. I was like,
he's so agile.
It was like him being on safari, just an animal coming up to the truck. But we
snakes in on its prey. Right.
Appreciate all you guys for tuning in and hanging with us. So make sure to hit that like button if you can. And also check out some of the data that we have going on Awesemo.com, including the ownership projections, which are actually free today. And I'll link them in the YouTube chat as well, so you can take a look for yourself. But they're going to be something we reference a lot here. We will do money time at the halfway point of the show. So I'll flip the hat and give you guys the top 5 projected owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for the slate. But you can check them out for yourself as we go throughout the show. So make sure to go click that link that I just put in the YouTube chat and take a look for yourself. If you want to get all the MLB data for yourself every single single slate, go to awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code MLB live before lock to get 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus. It's a big discount on there, and you got a lot of options. So go to awesemo.com/join. Use that promo code MLB live before locked for 25% off. And then the last plug here, and it's going to be a good one for you guys, where I know we're got a lot of people who are going to be new to MLB DFS today, and we have some people who are just maybe frustrated with MLB DFS, and it's a fun mix here for all the people we can cater to on the show. But PrizePicks does something for you where if you like baseball and honestly you're terrified of the idea of having to figure out stacks and manage ownership and all of that, play over at PrizePicks. It's the simplest form of daily fantasy you'll find out there. You don't have to deal with sharks, optimizers, or mass multi-entry. All you have to do is pick 2, 3, 4, 5 players on the board to go over or under their projected scores. There are also some prop lines on there you can mix in as well, but you can stack across sports, go NBA, MLB, WNBA, NFL, and even esports. Again, max them all up together and go to a cross sport parlay. That's what you can do over at PrizePicks while using the fantasy sports component. So go check them out on the App Store or on Google Play. Use the promo code Awesemo for a $100 deposit match. That is a big one over at PrizePicks. So go check them out. And I mentioned it on the strategy show, but I'm still on the same page here, Eric, that for me, one of the top props that I like on the board is going to be Tyler Mahle's strikeouts. Over 6 strikeouts to me looks pretty appealing. I like him for the DFS slate, but I think that prop over at PrizePicks stands out. Are there any that jump out to you meaningfully as well for somebody out there just trying to build a few plays over at PrizePicks?
I like that. I think that there is something to be said about a guy like Darvish, a couple of these other spots. Like Darvish isn't in a great case spot as it is against this Dodgers team. You have nobody that's striking out at a high clip. I know that the arm talent is there, but we're going to see some stuff happen with some of these pitchers where they fall off a little bit of a cliff. And I have a feeling that it's going to be more of the elite pitchers that really see some of the after effects of this spin rate with the sticky stuff. So I think taking some unders on a guy like Darvish and combining it with a guy like Mahle or Urias, who we haven't seen many changes to them. And depending, I think the Tatis piece also for the Padres, as good as that dude is hitting baseballs, and he's very, very good at hitting baseballs, he also strikes out right around 28% of the time. So I think Urias would be a guy that I would trend on the over of as well. Be going on to the under of a guy like both you, Darvish, playing over on Mahle, kind of mixing and matching with the pitchers you think might not be affected and the ones that you think will be. And that I think there's going to be a huge amount of money to be made in the strikeout props coming forward in the next week or two. So just kind of like stay tuned to what's happening with these spin rates. We'll be keeping you updated. We've got strategy shows in the morning. We've got live before locks. We've got deeper dives. We have so much baseball content that's going to be coming out, and we'll definitely keep you apprised of what we're seeing.
Yeah, so you, Darvish, you heard them talk a little bit about that on the deeper dive, some of the downturns there, though it could also be the situation where his last matchup was at Coors, and certainly the air out there can affect a spin rate. But I will say, and I guess let's start it off here because we usually talk about the top pitching here when we went, I guess we moved around the deeper dive format and the live before lock format, but we're going to do top pitching here in the first half of the show. You, Darvish, to me is going to be a big time DFS play I'm going to today. I didn't necessarily expect that. I thought about muting it as well because I do think you, Darvish, comes with A, that spin rate risk, and B, the fact that he does have a pretty high launch angle on the year, a 19-degree launch angle, where if he's not getting that spin he's accustomed to, things could be dangerous against a Dodgers team that certainly has enough power, though. As mentioned earlier on the strategy show this morning with Greg, like it's not the best Dodgers lineup you're going to see for the most part. And hopefully, it's not, we still only have the projected lineup right now, but still, it's a team that's not quite as good as it's been normally. And I think if there is going to be any sort of reservations right now, the ownership not showing a lot of reservations going to you, Darvish, with 37% of the field expected to be there. But I think it's going to be lower, Eric. And I think that to me is why I'm willing to get above the field on you, Darvish, today. Also, just my sorting process is putting me there. So maybe I'm also justifying where my money will be spent tonight. But I think you, Darvish, comes with that risk. But at the same time, if people are going to be under on him, I think it's possible he still has similar strikeout stuff. It's just maybe he's just always going to be a 29% K rate guy and not get to the 35% or so he's had for portions of both this season and last season.
I'm right there. And I'm not saying that I'm not high on Darvish as a pitcher. I'm just saying that I think that there is some value to be had on the under of the K prop, sitting around, what was it?
Well, I think it's a good hedge if you're playing him in DFS.
Yeah,
like, that's
exactly.
The thing, yeah.
And not only that, but I think that there's a path for him to get 6 Ks, go 7 innings in this spot. As we've said, it's a watered down Dodger lineup. I think that game that you attended was the largest MLB bet I've had in the entire season. And I've kind of inherited the Dodgers as my NL team out here, because that's kind of the social thing that you do when you move out here. Everybody goes to Dodger games. It's the talk of the town in Los Angeles, at least amongst my friend group. And kind of for the last 10 years I've lived in LA, gone to so many Dodger games. But the largest bet I've made all season long was the Zach Wheeler and Clayton Kershaw game that they matched up against each other. And you looked at that Dodger lineup going up against Zach Wheeler, and there was just nothing. They just had nothing to go up against him there. It ended up being a 2-0. I took the under, took the Phillies there. I think that this is kind of the same situation. Every time they're going to be facing an elite pitcher, I want to be shorting the Dodgers in their current iteration. Currently right around a 3.4 implied run total. I mean, that is a low number for a team that we think of being the juggernaut of the NL. A team that 3.4 is very, very rare to see for a Dodgers team. That tells you how good Yu Darvish is. The temperature's under 65 degrees at first pitch, winds blowing in. Everything is checking every box for Yu Darvish. I'm not saying that he's necessarily going to go out and mow down 8 or 9 Dodgers, but I definitely still like the spot for him. Still think he can be successful. And I think on a 6-gamer, that's really all you need. I don't think that there's a lot of these other spots where we're going to have pitchers going for 25 plus outside of Molly or Montas that really have that. Alzolay is another guy we'll talk about too, but I don't think that there's a ton of like crazy amount of Ks available around the market today.
Yeah, I'm on the same page with you. Also, we got the Padres lineup early, so
No
that's
way.
Interesting. Let's see how that looks.
Tatis is there. Okay,
so Tatis going to be in. Actually, my cruncher is holding up my ability to see the lineup. All right, let's see. We got Tommy Pham, Tatis, Cronenworth, Machado, Will Myers, Trent Grisham, Ha-Seong Kim, and Victor Caratini. So that's an interesting grouping. I would worry a little bit. Like Cronenworth hitting in the 3-hole, he's terrible against lefties. I guess it's a good thing they got Hosmer out of the mix. But overall, I feel like this is not a bad Padres lineup, but one that is not going to affect anything I'm doing with Julio Urias. And I guess here's the question I have for you, Eric, is are you getting to Urias and Darvish together? Because the Awesemo projections today, I think, do make both these guys look fairly appealing. As Jordan, our producer, is speculating in the chat, and some other people, I do like Tyler Mahle. In fact, I am a big fan of him in general, and also mentioned him on the strategy show this morning as a guy I would also like to get to above the field. But I think Urias and Yu Darvish, to me, are plays that look the most solid and I think come up the most easily on an optimizer. And the ownership, I think, not as crazy for these guys as it could be, especially for Urias, who actually is a slightly under-owned according to the top pitchers tool. But are you willing to play both guys together in the same lineup, Eric? I know the win bonus can sometimes be overrated, but this game to me kind of seems like it should be a pitcher's duel. It's humid in San Diego, but not that hot. So I guess it's one thing to point out. And I feel like the overall, you mentioned the wind blowing in as well. The overall makeup and the low totals here do kind of make it look like it could be a pitcher's duel that we're seeing between the Dodgers and the Padres.
I really like this lineup for Urias. I'm very, very happy to see Kim in there. He's right around 25% K percentage on the entire season, as opposed to a guy like Profar, who's going to be at 16.5%. That's a big boost for him, just in terms of his upside. Cronenworth, it makes sense he's in the 3-hole and Hosmer in the 5-hole. Right now, both Kang below 15% against lefties on the season. So that's still going to be a positive spot for them here as well. Just kind of going through the rest of this lineup.
Wait, no Hosmer in the lineup, right?
No Hosmer. Okay, yeah. Never mind. Sorry. Will Myers, though. Let me pull that up. Sorry, I had Hosmer there. Cronenworth is underneath 15%, 14.1% K percentage on the season here. And then Ha-Seong Kim, 25%. So, I mean, Hosmer is the guy that would generally be another guy who just can kind of make contact with it and kind of, that's another K that basically you're adding into the lineup here, having Will Myers 25.4% K percentage on the season. I think this lineup, while it's still going to be potent and it still has the normal righties that we know can inflict damage like Tatis, and Will Myers has been coming on of late. Manny Machado's a 17% K percentage on the season as well. And we know the kind of hard hit numbers. He has 55.1%. There are some available Ks now. Kim is an upgrade over somebody like Profar. And then Will Myers playing first base as opposed to Eric Hosmer. That's an upgrade. I think there's a lot more Ks available in this lineup, if I'm looking at this correctly, with Urias. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind having Hosmer in there because he's really bad against lefties. So that's one that I wouldn't say is necessarily a big downgrade, but is more of a lateral move for the lineup. But I'm still with it. I mean, the aggregate lineup I have, or the aggregate K rate I have for the lineup is 27%. So that's going to be boosted a bit by Yu Darvish, who does strike out a lot. And I guess that is also a benefit too, that Yu Darvish does strike out a lot. You'll find some easier Ks for Urias in the spot too. But for me overall, I think I will be heavy on Urias in a way that I didn't expect earlier today. But the price tag works. The projection from Awesemo looks pretty solid. So to me, both Darvish and Urias are both live. And it's worth pointing out that Urias, as they talked about in the deeper dive right before us, Greg in particular pointing out Urias' spin rate, not one of those guys is affected. He's been really good on the year too, with a 13% swing strike rate, 39% chase rate. So if he's getting those numbers without sort of whatever extra added bonus, sticky things or sunscreen or whatever, I'm willing to go to Urias and just hope that, he can continue to be the 27% K rate guy has been. And there's nothing I'm seeing this year. Like, I'm really encouraged by what I've seen from this year. He's faced 330 batters and only a 3.5 xFIP. And it's, always going to be tough going against San Diego, but Urias' stuff I think is good enough. And he's not giving up a lot of the troublesome contact that we sometimes point to as being an indicator of a guy that could just come with a lot of risk.
Love it. Nothing to add, Ben.
Let's talk about some of the other pitching on the slate. And there are a lot of guys here that we can hit on, but I feel like we should talk about Tyler Mahle, who still going to be decently low owned, or at least lower owned than Urias and Yu Darvish. And guys, hit that like button if you can as well. We appreciate it a bunch on here because obviously we're doing this content. We're making lineups as we go too. I'm personally hoping that my sheets don't break here for the first time doing MLB lineups while doing a live before lock show. So fingers crossed here, though. Maybe that'll bring some added joy for some people out there to watch us suffer live on the vine. But talk to me about Tyler Mahle, because he's a guy I am anticipating getting about 2x the field, maybe a little bit less than that with his ownership coming up, but a 30% K rate guy on the year, 3.6 xFIP. And he's facing a Twins lineup that does have Nelson Cruz in it. I think there was some concern he might not have made it in, or might not have made it in as a guy who was injured recently, but still, you have dangerous power in the 2, 3, 4, 5 hole. I guess maybe not so much Trevor Larnach, but Buxton, Cruz, Kepler, those guys give you concern. The rest of the lineup, though, I think that Mahle got a little lucky with some of these guys, where you have Ryan Jeffers, who's not very good, Andrelton Simmons, who doesn't strike out a bunch, but still not likely to do a lot of damage. Maybe does gobble up some of Mahle's pitch count. But besides that, I feel like if he survives Buxton, Cruz, and Kepler, and granted it's 1/3 of the lineup, so it's still a big ask, Mahle has a really good runway. And I'm surprised our projection's actually coming down a little bit here for Mahle. I'm still willing to be above the field, Eric, but how are you feeling about him? Because it's 16-point projection from Awesemo, given the price tag on DK. It's really not fantastic looking for Tyler Mahle.
I like Tyler Mahle, and I like the Twins side of it too. I mean, he does such a good job of limiting hard contact, which is an important thing to do up against this Twins lineup. We know how bad their bullpen is and their pitching, but their lineup in general can make some hard contact, and under 33% hard hit percentage on the entire season, exit velocity under 90, does get a launch, a little bit more of the fly ball nature, 16-degree launch angle. So Tyler Mahle, maybe he has a couple homers that he could give up to. I mean, there's just so much power up and down this Twins lineup, and that's not going to surprise anybody. That's not a hot take. I would say that I'm enjoying seeing that there is wind blowing out to right field, 10 miles per hour for guys, those lefties. Larnach, who's shown a little bit of pop, he's 2.9K over on DK. I think that that's a plug and play. Max Kepler, 2.9K. If you're going to a lot of these builds and you're kind of doing 5-2, 5-3, I think they both make interesting pieces to add in there. And then Kirilloff, also 60 out of 60 power score over on Fangraphs. Haven't seen the pop we expected directly coming up to the majors here for him, but still, what is it? 92% or 92 mile per hour exit velocity on the season, 46.7 hard hit percentage. That's sitting third on the team behind Buxton and Cruz. So, I mean, that just kind of tells you what the potential is for this entire lineup. But Mahle has just been so good. I got to play both sides of it. This is that classic, just play both sides of it and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm landing with it too, where I think it's worth hedging a little bit off of Mahle with the bats just to try to cover the potential here that, as Eric pointed out, decent launch angle. He's not giving up a ton of barreled balls. Usually the combination of those two things with the hard hit rate plus giving up the high launch angle, that's what you really have to watch out for. And Minnesota today shouldn't have played for a ton of power, only 66 degrees, 31% humidity. So that would put me a little more towards Mahle. But I think for mini stacks in particular, taking some of the Twins here, especially Buxton being back in, Nelson Cruz, and again, Max Kepler, I think those are the ones that really stand out to me. I think that's the way that I would handle it. We're getting some of those 3-mans, getting some of the 2-man stacks of that grouping of guys. And then that's my hedge point. But I guess the other question, and we're going to talk more about hitting in the second half of the show, but a lot of ownership going to the Twins. And I would say that I think Tyler Mahle is good enough. It's not a good bullpen behind him. So I guess maybe you can kind of have Mahle have a decent day and still see these guys get there. But a 3.9% home run rate for the bullpen, 4.6 xFIP. So that's not the best marks, but I don't want to have 20% Byron Buxton. Like, that's a lot of that guy. It's also a lot of Max Kepler, just shy of 15% on DK. Do you feel like the Twins stack is going to be worth as much ownership? Or like, I mean, Mahle, I think, is a good pitcher enough that I just feel like the Twins ownership feels really risky to be that lofty.
Yes and no. I mean, you're asking the wrong guy. You're asking an absolute.
You are a homer, unabashed.
I'm an absolute. Okay, so I have a little bit of a blind spot when it comes to this team, the Bomba squad. Like, it just becomes a question of who ends up being the guys who can hit these solo shots. Like, it's a 6-game slate. It's a 6-game slate. We have 12 teams that we're plucking teams from. And if you're looking at this just from a power perspective, as you said, not the best lineup in the entire world for them putting out, but Buxton is a huge addition. Nelson Cruz making sure he was in the lineup is a huge addition. Araz gets on base at a pretty decent clip. There's the mixture of expensive guys and cheap guys. It makes it very easy to mix and match whomever you want in that entire lineup. I mean, I'm just taking Simmons out of my pool. I don't think that there's really a need to be going there, but otherwise up and down that lineup, there's enough good hitting here that it could go both direct. Like I think that the launch angle is enough. And as you said, he's not giving up a ton of hard contact. That's the one nice thing to see out of Molly here. That 32.6% hard hit percentage on the season. Kane dude's nearly 30%, both just elite numbers. So he's a great pitcher, but this also is such an improved lineup when you get Buxton in there. It's like day and night getting him in his current iteration back into that lineup. So I think that there is the potential. I think it's probably worth around 10% of your lineups, and I have no problem with it. I have a little bit more because I have problems, and that's just who I am. I would not be okay if they ended up putting a 10 spot on the board and I wasn't invested there. But I think looking at the rest of this slate, there's so many spots where there is some leverage to be had. I mean, you can still get leverage by going to Houston if you're stacking it up correctly. I mean, 25% the top stack percentage on this slate. There just aren't that many great hitting environments, which is strange because we've had so many good hitting environments, but it's 80 degrees there in Baltimore. Otherwise, you have 63 degrees right now in for the Cubbies game. You have the roof closed in Texas, not great. Under 65 degrees there. Roof closed now in Arizona is what I'm seeing there. And then under 65 degrees. It's the only hitting environment that's over 80 on the entire one, and it's not really remotely close. So that is the one knock against this Twins lineup. But otherwise, I love both sides of it, and there's not going to be anything that gets me away from that.
Yeah, I get it. And I think certainly, the power bats are going to jump out. And I'm with you overall. And I'm just making sure that, boy, the Fantasy Cruncher live on a show, having to click your guys and make sure they're in.
I'm literally sweating over here. And I don't know if anybody can tell. I mean, I am trying to do this live. Okay, maybe I was a little overzealous coming up of NBA. I've been clicking unreg as much as I humanly possibly can here right now. I'm like, maybe I'll trim it down to 50 lineups on FanDuel and just kind of like breathe the rest of the show because, oh boy, this is stressful.
You know what, though? We got all the lineups out, so I feel like I'm
That's
okay now. I just needed to make sure that the players were actually all accessible because that is the one thing. If you are doing an MLB lineups for the first time on Fantasy Cruncher, because of the lineups changing and sometimes guys being in the mix and sometimes, too, where you can upload the Awesemo projections and you'll still get guys who are Fantasy Cruncher projected for X amount of fantasy points as well. Just make sure you are clicking those correctly and getting those lined up because sometimes there will be guys who are either not in the lineup or, whatever. Like it just doesn't always catch that perfectly. So that's one thing just to double check for everybody out there if you are new to that one. And I guess that's one question. We're going to talk about the rest of the pitching here, but though honestly, I think we've covered the stars already. So that was the main part. Adbert Alzolay, we need to dig into a little bit more, but is there anything you would recommend for people in terms of just overall strategy for the new people out there? Because we did have the show with Josh and Alex up top talking about how those guys view things though. I did think it was funny in the YouTube description. It's like two of the greatest fantasy players in the world.
Greg Ehrenberg, or sorry, Josh and
Josh and Alex. And Josh definitely getting carried to that crown.
Hey, you know what? I will say, very first show I ever did with Josh, I thought he was the greatest DFS player ever. He won 40K on FanDuel and NBA. So I will always remember that I'm Josh's good luck charm. He probably doesn't think of it that way, but I do. I like, so I write the Slate Starter article for MLB here now. I was writing it for NBA. I basically just try to give everybody, I can kind of randomly go through topics. I don't know. They've never told me a way to do things. I've just gotten to be able to write whatever I want that I think can be applicable and that I think can be helpful to the gamer out there. And I was going through a couple of wild scenarios on things that you can do on a 6-game slate, because this is not your typical 10, 12, 14 game MLB slate we get during weekdays, or 8 games in the morning and 7 in the afternoon. Like, this is basically a 6-gamer. This is a short MLB slate, and there are things that you can do. I'm probably not going to be delving into the playing a one-off against my pitcher in this spot. It's just going to be a little bit too thin. That's something that I'm looking more to do on 2, 3, 4 gamers, where I'm kind of finding a one-off. I'm trying to isolate some power, somebody who can hit a solo home run, not completely ding up my pitcher, and can still kind of find a guy who's a high strike. Molly would be a perfect example today, because you have a guy like Max Kepler, who's 2.9K, who has enough power, wind's blowing out to right. You could play him up against Molly, play both sides of it, and you have a very, very unique lineup in that spot. I think it's thin today. I don't need to be going there. I think what I'm mostly doing is I'm trying to get a little bit different with my stacks. One thing that I do specifically is I pay up for some of these batters in spots where you're playing like an Abraham Toro for the Houston Astros because he's 2.1K and it just makes it so easy. I'm trying to find ways to just play Brantley, just play Altuve, just play some of the expensive bats in the lineup for Houston, kind of making that my stance and not having the Chas McCormick at 3.1K, not having, Abraham Toro at 2.1K or a Castro out of the 9-hole 2.9K, finding ways to isolate like 2 or 3 of them, hoping that the big bats do the big damage, and then being able to mix and match a stack that's going a little bit underrepresented. Whether that's the Dodgers, they're under 5%. I think anytime the Dodgers are going to be super low owned, there's some viability, even against a guy like Yu Darvish, to still have a couple shares here and there. But trying to mix and match that, because you have 70,000 entries to beat out on DraftKings in the $5. You have 50,000+ entries to beat. This is a larger tournament than we normally have on some of these slates. And you've got to find unique combinations and do different things. You can't just go 5-3, 5-2, run it and, with the removing a 9-hole hitter and run it and expect good things to always happen. You've got to find unique paths. So I think that that's a little bit more of what I'm doing, is I'm being very specific with how I'm building my stacks today.
And we just get a projections update as well for all the people out there who are curious or following along. That is part of the paid package. The ownership projections are free today, though, so check those out. And if you want to get the player projections today, use that promo code MLB Live Before Lock for 25% off your first week. And it does seem like the postponement risk has gone up in that Baltimore game, so let's talk about that. I feel like the pitching not the most relevant in this one. This morning, I did think I was going to get to a little bit of Jake Odorizzi. It seems like it's not the case for me today, but I guess real fast about weather, Eric, how are you approaching this one? Because of the ownership going to these guys, I'm actually not getting a lot of Houston. I got some of Baltimore, but for me, they're sort of being taken down by my sorting process, which gives me a lot of concern going against Keegan Aiken, who not a guy who should be playing on the slate at all. 19-degree launch angle, 280 batting average allowed in the year, 1.5 whip, very bad marks across the board, which is why Houston will be so highly owned in addition to the park upgrade they're getting for themselves. But how are you approaching this one weather-wise? Are you playing it straight for now? Because I think everything that I've seen seems like it should start in a delay, but I guess there is a pathway for this one to have a little more risk.
Delay. It's delayed right now.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah, they said it's going to be delayed for rain. I think it's still going to go. So I'm looking at it here now, not to play. I just play a fake meteorologist on YouTube streams. That's what I'm doing here. But you have a severe thunderstorm watch that came out 4 hours ago. That sounds bad. It was in effect till 10 p.m. Eastern time for the following locations. And I don't think that's the county in Baltimore. Let me double check. Yeah, no, it looks like it's going to be clear there. I'm going through the rest of this precipitation. So it was always going to be raining right around this time today, but it looks like it's declining here on the back end. So I think the rain is going to start to come down here. I always get scared to say, like, you should do this or you should do that. I think I'm going to boost a little bit more Houston bats to account for this. It's hard to get an edge. If people are going to be scared off, even if it's 5% or so, we're already seeing positive leverage with these Houston Astros. I think I'm going to bump it up even a little bit more. It might be a bigger stand that I make on it. And again, I'm able to inherit some risk. I don't feel so bad going overweight to a spot like this. I think that the game plays. We've got EMAC in there. We still have 40 minutes here. We've got News God. We've got EMAC. We've got all the resources to be able to double check on some stuff. He's saying that 30 to 40 minutes ago, it was clear again and barely looked like it rained. Part of the same system approaching Baltimore. I'm playing it. Okay, well, that makes me feel better. EMAC, I can blame you now. That's great.
We're passing the buck along, which is always the goal here. Let's talk about some more of the pitching here. Adbert Alzolay is an important play for me as well, a guy that I'll be a bit above the field on. I think the final number I'm not going to quite know until I run one more crunch here. But Alzolay on the year, 27% K rate, getting hit a little bit harder than you like to see with 11% barrel ball rate, but does keep the launch angle down at 11 degrees as well. And the weather at Wrigley should be a benefit in addition to all the other things. 50% humidity, 65-degree weather, wind blowing in there. So should be a good spot for Alzolay overall. And I guess the question for you, Eric, is how heavy are you going to be to Alzolay? Because according to the top pitchers tool, he actually looks a little bit under-owned right now, though not by the biggest margin. And I'm willing to be there. Cleveland, to me, the guys that I'm worried about are going to be Bobby Bradley, Jose Ramirez, Eddie Rosario. But the rest of the lineup here, just really ugly across the board, and should be some easy strikeouts as well. So Aaron Zavala himself also does give up a good amount of strikeouts and whatever at-bats he's had. And it does seem like I'm willing to get to Alzolay a lot here today. So how are you approaching him on the slate, and are you going to be with or under the field?
I'm going to be over the field as well. I think that it makes a nice point of leverage here. So lowest implied total on the slate here with the Cleveland Indians. There's just not a lot of guys that you're that scared of outside of Jose Ramirez. We've seen Bobby Bradley be decent in some spots, but his numbers don't look that good to me. 36.7 hard hit percentage. Lefty is now down in the 6 hole. There's not a lot of pop here up top outside of Harold Ramirez, Jose Ramirez, whichever Ramirez. I'm not that scared of this lineup whatsoever. And with the wind blowing in from right, we know the kind of effect that can have and how sensitive Wrigley is to wind. I really like getting to Alzolay here. The one thing you could point to is I think he left. Didn't he leave his last start a little bit early? Something
he had a blister issue that had him on the IL, but they talked about in the deeper dive, and Alex feels like he should be full go because I think he only missed 2 starts.
Yeah, so whenever I think of blisters, I think of Rich Hill, and that's a bad example because, he was so sensitive to that stuff back in the day, and I'm not concerned here either. I think Alzolay makes for a great play. Maybe getting a little bit unlucky in the ERA department too, 4.06, but a 1.04 whip. I feel pretty darn good that he's one of the best spots to go to on the slate. And as you said, even like drastically, like minutely underrepresented here, 24.3% top two pitcher percentage, 15% ownership. That's way too low. I want to be double the field today. I'm at 33%.
Yep. I think it's a good mark to be at. And that's about where I was landing to in my previous sort before I run one more crunch. But we're at about the halfway point of the show. So we'll talk a little bit more about pitching, but let me flip the hat and we'll do money time here because why not? But the ownership projections are free for all of you guys today. So you don't need me for it right now. You can read them all to yourself. You can play the home version of money time for yourself if you just have a cheap leather hat for yourself somewhere in your closet. But go ahead and check them out right now on the site. The top 5 projected owned plays on DraftKings updated 6 minutes ago. Number 1, Yu Darvish, 39%. Number 2, Jose Altuve at 29%. Number 3, Frankie Montas. I think he's the guy who's coming down for me, 29%. Julio Urias, a little bit less at 27.5%. And number 5, Yordan Alvarez at 24.4. Eric, you're that top 5, Yu Darvish, Jose Altuve, Montas, Urias, and Alvarez. Any of them stand out to you as being ones that you're going to be particularly into the field on?
I mean, it might just be a result of how owned they're getting right now that I might be going a little less Darvish, just fractionally. I do have, I'm double the field right now on Dodgers bats, and that's simply because they're Dodger bats against anybody that are going under owned slightly. Not a great hitting environment, obviously a phenomenal pitcher in Yu Darvish, but nearly 40% there. No thanks. And then Montas, I think also being the higher owned of them, I just don't see that big of a gap. And now I really do want to get over the field on Urias. Did that ownership come up a little bit from where it was earlier here at 27.5%?
I think he was a little bit above 20 before, and now he's a little bit above 25.
Yeah, I think that's a result to people reacting to that lineup. That lineup is not very good. There are some more Ks that are available on the back end of it that I alluded to, and I think that that's probably more of where he should be. So maybe there's no leverage to be had there, but I'm not overly concerned. I'm going to be getting different with my stacks and how I'm going about combining them. And then, as I said, Alzolay, nearly flat ownership there as well. At this point in time, 23.6 and 21.2% ownership. I think that's about right. Gibson's the one guy you probably don't want to be getting too crazy with because I just think Oakland is pretty good lineup in general. I don't know if I want to be picking on him at that ownership here at this point in time. I'm half the field on that, going a little bit higher. I understand if you're trying to play some of these bigger bats, you might need him in a couple lineups here and there, and I'm fine with that, but not the most enthusiastic I've ever been to roster a pitcher.
Yeah, Kyle Gibson, the main benefit for him is that he's been pretty good at run protection, overall run prevention. And that to me is, a decent skill to have and can sometimes make a guy usable. So I know I'll have some Kyle Gibson. I'm not going to run away from that, but I would agree. Like he's certainly not a priority play, especially, Darvish and Alzolay and Urias. These guys are all pretty reasonably owned and guys that you can get to. Let's do the FanDuel top 5. Number 1 projected own play on FanDuel according to the Awesemo ownership projections. Jose Altuve, number 1 at 38%. Number 2, Yordan Alvarez, 36%. Number 3, Chas McCormick, 33%. Number 4, Christian Yelich at 31%. And number 5, Carlos Correa at 31%. And Eric, you hear those numbers, that is 4 Astros in the lineup. So I guess we could start to talk about them a little bit just relative to this ownership, but how are you feeling about the Astros stack on FanDuel where they are going to be pretty highly owned and pretty owned across the board? And maybe you can get some of the lower ownership product guys in the mix, but certainly actually they are still under leveraged according to the top stacks tool, which is surprising to see given you have those 4 guys being so incredibly highly owned.
Yeah, I think Houston's kind of a can't miss spot here now. And I don't think the ownership gets that high if we're going to have weather concern. If people are going to see rain delay, people just kind of pull the trigger on that stuff. And sure, there is definitely a better than 5% chances that this game gets PPD'd. But I think we'll probably know that before lock. I'm not positive, but I'm willing to inherit that risk. The one guy I want to just talk about for a second, because I did a deep dive on him yesterday, and he's one of my buddy. Hey, hi Cameron, if you're watching, because I know he generally tunes in. My buddy out here.
He watches all my
California.
shows, I bet. Yeah.
He does watch all your. Oh yeah, no, he jumps in chat under multiple pseudonyms to let you know how much he enjoys your commentary. You are a stud, let me tell you. But my buddy Cameron Cuneo, he was childhood best friends with Christian Yelich, and let me just tell you, Christian Yelich has some problems right now. There are some massive, massive red flags I have for him. If you're stacking up the Brewers, sure, include Christian Yelich. But I understand also that he's somebody who doesn't generally loft the ball very much. So over the course of the last couple seasons, in 2015 with Miami, 0-degree launch angle. 2.7 in 2016, 4.7. But we're getting into those MVP years. 2018, he had a 5-degree launch angle, which might not sound substantial. It isn't that substantial, but he hits the ball really, really hard. 92.6 mile per hour exit velocity, 113.6 max exit velocity. 2019, 11.3. I think he was an even better batter in 2019. He just ran into a buzzsaw for NL MVP there. He was second in voting. So he should have probably been winning back-to-back MVPs, and he just, was a remarkable hitter there. This season and last season, there are some issues. So 7.1, the max exit velocity went down nearly 6 miles per hour there. So a lot of those hard hits weren't going as far, down to 7.1 degree launch angle from the 11.3. This season, we are seeing a 1.8 degree launch angle for a dude who's still hitting the ball pretty hard, still has a top, 10 percentile in the MLB in that regard. But man, 1.8 degree launch angle. I mean, he's basically just trying to smoke ground balls past dudes in shifts in different situations. It's a hard thing to really accomplish upside. He has 3 home runs on the entire season. I know he's going to be one of the most expensive batters on this slate. I'm just playing 0% on DraftKings. I mean, I'm just flat out not going to have any at the current iteration. And then right now, 31% you just said on FanDuel. I am not going to play him as a one-off. I will play him in my Milwaukee stacks. But I mean, talk me into a reason. I know Merrill Kelly is not your best average pitcher, righty, and with the roof closed there, it's whatever. But like, I just don't see a reason to be like, I think there's so much home run potential. If we're trying to capture upside, Christian Yelich ain't it at 30%.
Yeah, so I was actually getting a lot of Yelich in my first sort, and I think I might have to be on that side just based on the projections and all of that. But I would agree, one of the things I've talked about, and it's, again, full credit going to our guy, Max Motrisky, who's definitely made me look a little more at it because he referenced it a lot, and I noticed happened to align with things that I was thinking and couldn't quite figure out the logic for. So Merrill Kelly is not a good pitcher by any stretch, but 13-degree launch angle is not that bad. 7% barrel ball rate's not that bad. And if Christian Yelich is also going to be driving the ball down on the ground, maybe you can sort of get enough singles where it matters or enough doubles, maybe get some stolen bases, whatever. Yelich has still been stealing bases at a pretty good clip, 4.3% rate for himself against right-handed pitching. But I think Yelich is not quite as good as he's been. And the fact that he's going to be entirely unowned, I guess would be the logic, or mostly unowned on DraftKings is why I'm willing to get there a little bit more. And relative to FanDuel, I agree though, as a very, very chalky play, I think there's a lot of risk you're taking on there. And to me, Yelich is certainly one of those plays that let me get the ownership for him on DraftKings, but he is at, and again, it's free today, so you can take a look for yourself, but it's 17% high price tag. You're sort of paying up to be contrarian there. And I think that's why I'm getting him a little bit more on FanDuel though. I would agree that, just getting less Yelich seems like one move you can make right away. And, to me, just going to different stacks, Milwaukee does appeal enough to me, but it's a lot of ownership going there. And I think your points are well reserved. It's just on DK, I think relative to the price tag and the matchup going against Kelly, it's worth pointing out Kelly is better against lefties and righties too. So if you want another reason to not play Yelich and you want to be a hero and not play him today, Kelly does give up only a 2.4% on run rate to lefties and a 154 ISO. So there's a logic there, and I'm with you on it. It just, I think, is not going to be the play I make because of the projections and how it all lines up for me.
180 plate appearances, 3 home runs, 1 out of 60. I feel very comfortable fading a 31% dude over 3,500 on FanDuel and then over 5K on DK. I think we can find some better pivots in there. And maybe this is the day that he goes out and burns me here, but I haven't had a chance to really short him outside of Coors Field was beautiful. That was finally the spot where we were able to get there, I wasn't able to take advantage of anything there, but he had the one good game in Pittsburgh on the 12th, but otherwise just not the kind of upside, not been the kind of hitter we expect him to be. And I just think it's a direct product of being able to get the ball in the air right now. I mean, he's still making hard contact, but if you're not going to be hitting home runs and you're going to be over 5K, I don't really want to be playing you as a one-off ever. And I really do not want to have you be part of like a priority stack of mine in a big tournament.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I am hoping I get a little bit less Yelich here, but it may be unavoidable for me on DraftKings. So I'll update as we go here. But pitching, to kind of close the loop here, I feel like we've talked about most of the guys. And maybe Frankie Montas is the one that we should just hit on a little bit here because he is going to come up a lot in an optimizer today. Though hopefully a little bit less for me this go around. But 29% expected ownership, as we mentioned on DraftKings, 17 fantasy point projection or so from Awesemo. And Montas, I think, is in a good situation going against Texas, who on the year strikes out at about a 26% clip against right-hand pitching. But Montas himself, as we talked about on the strategy show, like probably better than some of the priors that a lot of us have, where he came back initially from the PED suspension, was getting hit hard and didn't have anything. He is leveling out now to where his swing strike rate's actually up from where it's been historically, up to 12.3% from 11.8%, which isn't a big jump, but is enough to point out that might not just be a guy who's good only because of PEDs. Same thing for his chase rate, up to 35% from 34%. So Montas, to me, I have no issue getting there. I just think there's higher upside going to Urias, going to Alzolay, going to Yu Darvish, and the price tags are similar enough that, to me, Frankie Montas is the one who kind of gets left out in the cold. But how are you feeling about him? And I guess, are you willing to be with the field projected today to be around 30%?
Yeah, he's fine. I really don't have any kind of an opinion on him. And when I don't have that on a 6-game slate, I generally just flat out play them at that number. I can't remember which pitcher that was that Greg, it was Yu Darvish. Greg was referring to Yu Darvish kind of in that context where he's like, I'm fine just kind of being wherever the field lands in on him. I can see a path for Montas to be pretty decent in this spot. There's just so many Ks that are available above his expectations. So 24.2% K percentage. And as you said, nearly 26% against righties for the Texas Rangers at 25.6%. Looking up and down this lineup, I mean, guys like Gallo, Adolis Garcia, like all those dudes are going to be Kang at an above average clip, nearly 30% on all of them, actually above 30% on both of them. I think that there are a number of ways that he can do that. He also gives up quite a bit of hard contact, 45.1% hard hit percentage on the season, 453 X slugging. That's not going to be ideal, but he does limit walks. So it might not be a stack spot where I want to go crazy with the Texas Rangers stacks, but I think one-offs of Gallo, one-offs of Garcia, that's going to kind of be a solid path for me. I'm a little bit over the field on both of them.
Is there anybody else, a pitcher that you want to give a shout out to as somebody that you're getting more exposure to than you might have expected? I just want to close the loop on pitching as best we can, because I think we've covered the core guys for the most part, but maybe somebody slipped under the radar.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a tiny bit of J.A. Happ and I don't like it. see how it makes me already kind of sound a little grimy about it, but he's 5,300. I mean, you can't completely suck at 5,300, right? And like, if I'm going to go anywhere down there, I'm not going to play Aiken. I'm definitely not going to play Brett Anderson against Arizona, a team that just pounds lefties. I believe they have the most hard hit contact up against lefties on the entire season. Let me just double check that fact here as we go. It's fun going back and forth between the tabs. Yeah, 35.9% hard hit percentage on the season against lefties for Arizona. That's the best in the bigs. So if I'm just playing a punt for the sake of punting and just hoping something happens there, I think a flat leverage Shea Happ, I'm right now at 8%. And that's like the last dude in my pool that we haven't talked about.
Okay, so there you go. So that is a guy that I would not play, but certainly
I didn't say it was good. You just said to talk about pitching. I mean, he's 5,300, and it gives me exposure. If I'm paying up for some of these bats to get contrarian, that's a path. If I can get like 12 out of GA app, I'd be kind of ecstatic at that. I'm just basically leveraging it and saying, hey, don't anybody else, none of these other pitchers go for 25 plus, please. That'd be nifty. And then it gives me a little bit of a different lineup construction than anybody else has got.
Yeah, I'd certainly going to J Happ can.
God, you have no respect for this. You have no respect for that play whatsoever. I don't even like J Happ, excuse me. I don't even like that guy, but it's just a product of the salary and having a little bit different lineup construction in some spots. And man, I do like a lot of the bats with some of these lineups with him in it. So I'm going to try it out.
So I guess let's talk about the matchup against J-Happ. And it is going to be a spot for the Reds where they actually look a little bit under-owned according to the top stacks tool. And I'm hoping I will get a little bit more of these guys. But you have some bats in this lineup who really have had a historical lot of success against left-hand pitching. Nick Castellanos, 310 ISO since 2019 against left-hand pitching. Tyler Stevenson, a much smaller sample size, only 60 at-bats, but a 315 ISO against left-hand pitching. Eugenio Suarez going to have a 254 ISO against left-hand pitching and a reasonable price tag as well. Aristides Aquino, again, another guy, not the biggest sample size, but a 290 ISO against left-hand pitching. And then Happ gives up an 11% barrel ball rate, 18-degree launch angle. Again, numbers here that basically ask you to hit a home run off of him. It's not the greatest weather. That's really the one thing I think you can say for J-Happ here. And the field's going to be there 7% of the time. I just like the Reds a lot more. And now that ownership's come down as well, like I think you can stack this team up and get to a 5-man stack and not feel bad about it. And the Minnesota bullpen also not that good behind them either. 3.8% on run rate, 38% fly ball rate, 302 BABIP, 250 batting average. I'm willing to go to Cincinnati a lot here. So tell me your thoughts, because I feel like if you're playing Happ, you must have some Reds to hedge against the inevitable doom that J-Happ has coming his way.
Okay, I have my third highest owned stack is the Reds. Okay. I'm just saying I have 8% of a dude who's just underneath 6K that gives me a different lineup construction. I absolutely love playing teams against the Twins because their bullpen is Coors Field. It is unbelievable how bad the Twins can be. And their starting pitching is god-awful too. We've got a couple of arms that we're starting to call up that I think have some promise here coming forward, but yeah, Cincinnati, Jesse, I like playing the lefties specifically, like prioritize some, like Winker was the guy that I basically was like, yeah, I'm going to play him in any circumstance whatsoever. Wind blowing out to right here. Play those lefties as well. Throw in India, throw in Castellanos, Stevenson. I think it's a pretty easy spot to go to this Cincinnati team. I think that they are definitely under-owned, as we've currently got them as the third highest team for stack percentage. And he's basically flat there. I mean, minus 1.8% leverage. Like, who really cares about that? I'm happy to be going over the field on a 6-game slate on a team that I just think has a ton of potential to get into this bullpen and then has a ton of potential after that.
Okay. Look, I understand the logic here. I feel like if I were paying down, I might be more inclined to find a little more money to go to Kyle Gibson. But look, I get the logic, and anytime you can sort of find ways to chop up the ownership a little bit more. And Kyle Gibson's still going to be decently owned. It's worth pointing out here because his ownership is actually now up to 23%. So basically right in line with his chances to be a top value pitcher on the slate. So keep that in mind. But let's talk about more of the stacks here. And Minnesota in that game as well, going to look decent as we talked about against Tyler Mahle. What are your Minnesota numbers looking like? Because they look to be one of the highest owned and actually most over-owned stacks on the slate. And talked about in the first half of the show, Mahle's ownership down to 8%. I like the Tyler Mahle side of the equation a lot more. And I think that's something to me that I'd be willing to ride with. But how are you feeling about the Minnesota bats, and which are the ones that really stand out for you in terms of ownership?
Oh man. Well, relative to ownership now, I'm not enjoying myself very much. There's just so much stuff going on right now with all my tabs. I'm trying to make lineups and it is hard, man. This is a trip. I think the last live before lock I did, I maybe made 40 lineups. That was pretty manageable. This is not very manageable here at the moment, but I'm having fun either way. That just updated. What did you just say Minnesota's ownership is right now? I mean, that came up to 12.7%. That's too much against Mahle. I mean, Mahle is a good pitcher. I didn't expect something like that to be happening. And then top pitcher percentage right now, Mahle's still sitting above 20%. If he's going to be right around 8%, 7.5 is what I'm looking at. I must not have updated that yet. Oh boy, I'm probably going to have to end up boosting him and getting even more of what I had of Mahle. I apologize to my parents as I'm wearing a Twins hat, but now I'm going to have so much Mahle up against them. Do not shame me.
Let's talk about some of the other top stacks on the slate. And and I guess we should just talk about Houston a little bit more. Obviously, they are the chalk stack of the day. We talked earlier about Keegan Aiken and his numbers looking pretty bad. 18-degree launch angle, 11% barrel ball rate, 282 batting average, 5.6 xFIP. These are all going to be, actually, no, I'm looking at J-Happ, my bad. So he's so bad that in fact, I thought that he was Keegan Aiken. Keegan Aiken, though, also very bad. 280 batting average allowed, 1.5 whip, 19-degree launch angle, and actually a lesser barreled ball rate for Keegan Aiken. So he might be better than J-Happ. But we do see a lot of ownership going to Houston today, Eric. And it's a spot where I mentioned it on FanDuel, like these guys are going to be the top owned plays there by a pretty wide margin. On DraftKings, the only guy you can get under 10% owned will be Miles Straw. Everybody else in the neighborhood of 18% to upwards of 30%. How can you stack Houston and feel good about it? Be the question I have for you. And to me, I think it comes down to mini stacks a little bit more. They should be, again, it's a big park shift for them, assuming this game, goes off the way we're expecting, which it does seem should be the case in a delay rather. But this spot, I feel like Houston, the ownership is in such a way that I can only get to many stacks. And even then, I think that's really increasing the ownership product by a pretty wide margin. So how are you approaching them? And I guess, what are your final numbers going to look like for them on both, I guess, DraftKings or FanDuel?
I mean, did you refresh it? Because right now we've got Houston now at 12.6%. And I'm assuming that's just people scared and running away from Houston. And I am going way over now. If we're going to still get nearly 24% here, 23.7% top stack percentage, 12.6% ownership share. I had talked a little bit before about how I was just kind of being conscious of making sure that I wasn't getting a ton of Chaz and a ton of Toro, because they're the cheap guys who make anything that you want on the pitching side work. And now I don't know if I necessarily have to have those same concerns. And so through my process, what happens is that I'm basically updating the ownership and I'm reflecting in my lineups where I'm kind of basically playing a constant seesaw based up against the field and what they're doing. And right now, if I'm going to get a team that's going to be stacked up and winning a slate a fourth of the time, and I'm getting them at nearly 10, 12%, oh my Lord, am I going to be over the field? I mean, I'm going to have a scary number of just about every single batter in that lineup.
Yeah, I'm pulling in the new ownership now, and I guess I'll do one more sort for myself. But that is a drastic change that came through 7 minutes ago in the ownership projection. So as you can see, things are popping off fast here behind the scenes. But now, as I mentioned, these guys before, you had everybody from 18 to 25%. Now it's looking like everybody from 9 to 15%. Looks like the highest guy will be Altuve on DraftKings at just shy of 16%. So it is a different equation, and I guess you got to play some Astros and take on the risk. And that is a spot, man. I'm going to get Astros, I know, when I resort this now, but I feel like there's risks to that in a way that is the field really going to come down this much would be the question I would have. And I guess seeing the reactions to the weather in the YouTube chat, maybe that is going to be the case. Because normally, if you look at your peers or people just online in general, you can sort of get a read for how the field's going to go. And if that's the case, I guess as a DFS player, you probably do have to lean in and presume the game's going to go and absorb the risk in the hopes that these guys can go. So yeah, I'm going to sort again. And I presume the Astros will come up a lot for me.
I apologize ahead of time if this game doesn't end up going, because I'm just going to be drastically.
You should apologize directly to me. In fact,
I will. I'm already feeling bad about all of the things that I've said. I'm getting you off Yelich. I'm getting you on Astros. Yelich is going to hit a double dong, and this game's going to get PPD'd, and we're going to be broke, and we're going to be living under a bridge in downtown LA together in our little hut. Good times.
There is a very convenient bridge nearby my current apartment, so I think we can ingratiate ourselves to community very fast. One would hope.
Yeah, rain cover for the 3 days it rains in LA.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to not play the Astros now if the ownership is going to be there, and I hope that's the case. And if you are like us, and you're willing to absorb that risk, I'm not playing a crazy amount of money today. I'm not playing my usual NBA outlay. I'm just playing enough to get a taste for it while doing the show. And that is a spot where I think you have to play Houston if the ownership's going to be there. Let's talk about some of the other teams going on here, and I'm going to just try to sort through my lineups and get a read for this. I guess we have one question, which we've already answered from Jeremiah Johnson. Any worry for the rain in Baltimore? I think you just got to play it as it is right now. It'd be the way that, it's going to hopefully go one way that'll work out well for us. What stack is the priority for you, though? Because I think Milwaukee is still going to be pretty high up for me, as I mentioned, and that's the one that the ownership has come up a little bit because of that Houston ownership coming down, but still appeals to me going against Merrill Kelly. If the righty bats me, you're going to be sneakier for what we talked about, the lefty-righty splits that Kelly has. But what's the priority stack for you that's not Houston now, given that we've really talked about them enough and beaten them into the ground?
Oakland, definitely Oakland for me. If Kyle Gibson's also going to be popular, and I think you had just said that ownership was starting to come down. I'm just refreshing everything constantly. Yeah, we're still seeing him nearly 25% owned. Give me some leverage there on a 6-game slate going up against Kyle Gibson. And Kyle Gibson has been very, very good, a surprisingly good pitcher the last couple of years here, coming out of Minnesota. Of course, I'm well acquainted with him, but I like targeting a lot of this Oakland team, just so much power that exists in this lineup up and down. I mean, going all the way down to the 9-hole even. I mean, you've got Chad Pinder there, Sean Murphy, some guys with decent pop, Jed Lowry in 6-hole. Elvis Andrus sucks, but I'm pretty sure that I really like getting to this entire team. Tony Kemp has been surprisingly decent of late here too. I just like a lot of this Oakland team. We're seeing them as slight favorites against Texas here. 4.2 implied run total. Sign me up for that.
Yeah, Oakland, I get it. So the one thing we talk about with the launch angle stuff is that, pitchers generally who are going against teams that don't have a high launch angle, and then the pitcher also keeps the ball down pretty well, which is the case for Kyle Gibson, only an 8-degree launch angle in the year and a 4% barrel ball rate. Normally, you're going to be safe against a lot of lineups. That was the logic we had in some of the shows I did last week, where I talked about fading the particular spots in cores going against some of the guys like the Antonio Senzatellas of the world, the Austin Gombers of the world, guys who keep the ball down. The one thing that is bad for a pitcher, or not bad, but riskier for a pitcher who keeps the ball down, is when they go against a team with longer looping swings, guy with high launch angles. And Oakland, being one of the most analytically sound teams in the league, every single guy in this lineup for the most part is chopping that ball upwards, and that includes Tony Kemp. Tony Kemp actually the highest launch angle on the team at 20 degrees, which is interesting. Mark Canha as well, high launch angle guy, Matt Olson. So these are the guys you can sort of get to with a little more confidence. I think Laureano and Mitch Moreland, to me, slightly less appealing for that reason. Those guys a little more close to line drive guys.
Same with
but
Pinder,
the rest of this,
by the way.
Pinder's
under a 4-degree launch angle.
Yeah.
So Pinder, not enjoyable there. But in the 9-hole, 4.5K, I don't think you're going to get to much of him anyway.
Yeah, and I think, too, that's really the main thing is that Kyle Gibson normally not going to be a very volatile pitcher, but on this particular slate where, he doesn't have a ton of strikeout upside. Oakland also doesn't strike out a ton either, only a 23.3% K rate against right-hand pitching. You got to, I guess, take some stabs at these guys. And I'm with you. I think they are worth stabs. To me, more mini stacks, because I think Gibson's good enough that I don't expect all these guys to get to him, especially in a roof closed day in Texas. But a spot overall that Oakland, I think, has some appeal and does seem under-owned according to the top stacks tool. Did you get any Texas Rangers for yourself going against Montas? Because it looks like they're owned a good amount and actually a little bit over-owned according to the top stacks tool. But because of the value they have, it does seem like they can come up a lot on an optimizer.
Yeah, and I like the lefties. I mean, guys who are going to K, and I talked about how Montas can be on one side of it, but Gallo and then Adolis Garcia righty. But I really like a lot of the pop that they have in that lineup. They K a lot, which is fun for DFS. They also can hit some solo shots, which is fun for DFS. Another one of those both sides of it games for me.
Also, I'm going to get a lot of Julio Urias today.
Oh, dude, I have 43% now. It got weird, didn't it? Yeah.
I think Yu Darvish's ownership coming up is dropping him a lot for me. Actually, I might not even get much Yu now, which is interesting because that was definitely a play mentally I'd like to make. But at this point in the show, I'm probably not going to move that around so much. So Julio Urias, go Julio, because that is something. And the Astros also, by the way, did come up exponentially for me by sorting here. I'm now getting a ton of Gurriel, a good amount of Abraham Toro, Altuve. So if this game somehow doesn't play,
welcome to the shit show. Welcome, my friend.
Find me chasing at an NBA heavily tomorrow, but yeah, I'll be playing a lot of the Astros.
It's a good time to be alive.
Where's Christian Yelich for me? That's one that I'm actually curious about.
Yeah, I have 2%.
All right, I got him in 4 lineups, so I'll take.
There you go.
Take that amount.
Okay. I'm just giving you the facts. I mean, we're a data driven company here, and I want to throw it out there that the guy is not hitting the ball in the air. Hard to hit home runs if you're if you're averaging a 1.8 degree launch angle. Pretty difficult.
That is true. Generally, that's not going to go out of the park. In fact, it might just hurt the pitcher. So maybe that's the move here. Like in a video game, you hope you can stretcher the pitcher out by just.
Oh yeah, so don't play Merrill Kelly because he might get injured. That's great. I like that take.
Let's see other stacks that are going to be under-owned today. And actually, let's look at FanDuel to see, try to make things equitable as best we can here. And let me refresh to get this information where it should be. The Houston ownership on FanDuel also actually didn't come down quite as much, but they still do look under-owned. The highest leverage besides Houston right now is actually going to be Baltimore, which is, are you taking on the risk with Baltimore? Because I think taking it on with Houston makes a good amount of sense if people are going to be under there because of the delay in the game. But for Baltimore, I think there's a little bit less sense there, but they look like the most under-leveraged team, according to the top stack tool for FanDuel. How are you approaching the Orioles for FanDuel?
I have a lot of them. I have 12%. I mean, they came up in mine as well as we're looking at this ownership start to come down. Plus, again, Jake Odorizzi. I don't know. I'm seeing his name around in some spots. I mean, I guess his ownership's now down, and I would expect that he would not be somebody that would pop up a lot. Maybe I'd change some of my JA Happ to Jake Odorizzi at 5,900. If he's going to be a little bit under-owned, he's got a top 2 percentage of 10.7%. That's not anything meaningful, but he's under 6K. And so there's probably a better path for him than JA Happ, I would say. Coming in at 6.8% owned. He's actually lower owned than JA Happ on our last run of ownership. So maybe I'll move to that, a little bit of that. But on my last run here, I'm hoping Cruncher speeds up a little bit for me here. I'm ready to go. But I think that getting to a little bit more of Baltimore makes some sense as well. They'll go a little bit under-owned in this spot. Not the priority over Houston. I mean, Houston at their current ownership is just, I'm getting to so much of them and it's ridiculous. But give me a little bit more Baltimore now too.
Jets World asking, what's the DK policy on late swap with the Astros game? You are asking a question I have no answer to. I feel like that changes by the day, but what do you think?
I think what it is that if it gets postponed before lock, that you're able to have that little red icon and you're able to swap out of it. But if it gets postponed after lock, like after the lineup lock of it, then you're in trouble. I don't think you're able to swap out of it. So I think after 407 or 410 or whatever it is, 405, then we're in a lot of trouble if we hear postponed.
Yeah, so keep an eye on that one, and I guess we'll find out here. Gerardo asking, what about the 2-2-2 roster construction approach? Is a FanDuel question. That's not the kind of thing you should do if you're new to the sport, especially. And Alex talked about it on that show with Josh to lead it off here, and I think also mentioned on the deeper dive. You're generally trying to stack more than not, especially if you are playing baseball for the first time. So like for DraftKings, you're trying to push more towards 5-3 stacks or 5-3s and 5-2s. On FanDuel, trying to go more towards 4-4s or 4-3-1s. But that's really the main thing here. Like especially if you're new to the sport, like if you're an expert, if you're an Awesemo, if you're some of our founding team, if you're like one of those guys who just made a killing at it, then you get a little more leeway, I think, to be flexible with that kind of stuff. But even then, they're mostly trying to target full stacks because each at bat that's successful opens up another at bat for another guy. So that's the logic behind stacking. With a 2-2-2, you're basically just pulling a slot machine, and that's the kind of move I definitely would try not to make unless that's like 1 out of 150 lineups.
Yeah, it becomes so much harder to capture that upside. And if a team goes for 10 runs, think about the extra bats. Think about the fact that you're able to score runs. So this is unlike NBA where there's no shared stats outside of an assist to a bucket. In baseball, you get the opportunity to have steals that can be doubles. You can have double steals. You can have RBIs that one side of it's going to get the 2 points for the run, 2 points for the RBI along with the hit. You're going to get so much positive correlation with these players together. And if a starter ends up getting pulled, everybody gets to go up against that bullpen. Everybody gets to go up against weaker pitchers in certain spots, especially a team like Cincinnati going up against Minnesota. You have a terrible starter followed by a terrible bullpen. Like, it can't get a whole lot better for an entire team if you get into that bullpen early. It just raises the floor of everybody so high.
Yep. I think that's a good way to sum it up. And definitely you want to stack more. And this is a sport that is unlike any other in terms of just your need to stack. I guess maybe hockey is very similar too, but the stacking here are going to be the most important thing you do for yourself and just giving yourself a shot for really just getting more at bats. Any other questions in the premium Slack? I'm jumping around here, but if you have any questions, start to put them in now to the premium Slack or the YouTube chat. Let's see, nothing else here on the Slack. El Negro Loco saying the game should play, so keep that in mind. Though obviously, we're just doing the best to break it down based on the news out there. So there's no guarantees on that one, but that's the way I'm playing it. Craig is playing Cincinnati and Arizona as a stack today, I think, including Tyler Mahle as the pitcher. I have no issue with that. I would say Cincinnati to me came down a little bit more, actually got less of Castellanos than I would like, which is something that I'm not feeling fantastic about, but they did come down a little bit more for me. The guy is still coming up a lot as Tyler Stevenson as a one-off, which I don't feel bad about, but I think that's certainly going to be a chalky option. I feel like Stevenson must come up for a lot of people as a one-off.
He has to. I mean, he's a 4-hole catcher. I think anytime we see a catcher that's batting higher in the lineup order, you can just boost their ownership a little bit extra. It's what people do, and it probably is the right way to do it if you're playing any kind of cash games. But I think the ownership is also reflective of that, and it gets accounted for it. So I try to get a little bit different when I see something like that. But yeah, if you're hand building, he's a guy that you see who's like, oh, he's batting fourth, and you're just going to click him in. That seems to be the trend.
Yeah, I would agree. The same thing with Abraham Toro, who really got into way too many of my lineups.
I was going to say, he's the optimizer special today. 2.1K coming off a 4-for-5 game. It is going to be a gross day for you and me, sir.
Yeah, let's hope he keeps it rolling here. Normally not the biggest fan of guys who have no power at all, and also he somehow doesn't steal bases either. So he hopefully starts slapping that ball around once the rain clears out or whatever is going on there. Let's see. Anybody else that you really want to hit on here? I think the Dodgers still have some degree of appeal, especially for the top of the order batch. Just given Yu Darvish, the high ownership going there, that's still at 41% mark for him, and that's why Yu Darvish is coming down a lot for me in terms of my exposure. But the Dodgers, I feel like low implied total, not the highest probability here, but I wouldn't mind taking stabs there if you're a person who is not hosting a live show and can manage your exposures a little bit better. I think taking some Dodgers here, no ownership at all going their way. That's one team that I feel like we should hit on just to say, like, it's probably worth playing a little bit of them. If you are, even at 20 max, I think I would try to get one or two in.
Yep, I'm over the field on them. I talked about it a little bit earlier where this is a watered down version, but you still have at the top of that lineup, Betts, Lux, Turner, Smith, the four kind of guys that you would want to be going to in this spot, regardless of who was on the other side pitching. So a little bit more than the field is fine by me. It's only a 6-game slate. You don't need much out of them to possibly have them end up busting. You would just kind of basically be betting against other teams going off.
You got about 3 minutes left to lock, probably 2 by the time you guys hear this. So make sure to get your lineups in if you have not yet. And also, I guess, just get the lineups in. That's really the first part here. That's the main thing for any DFS slate is getting your lineups in.
You are so helpful, Spags. You are so helpful. Yeah, tell the people what they don't know. Get your lineups in.
You got to give the basics sometimes. People don't know how to stack. People sometimes don't know to upload their lineups. There's a lot of similar little intricacies here to playing DFS that are crossover between sport and getting your lineups in. That's one they'll always say. One team that I think you hit on briefly, but I do want to just give a little cosign to because they did come up more because of the sorting process I had, is Arizona going against Brett Anderson. And it would be really nice if that roof were open, but still the ownership here, I think not the most appealing according to the top stacks tool, but the value they represent, I think does make them work for many stacks to sort of get where I wanted to go. So that's a team that's me. I think I'll be with the field overall. But I think, going to some of these guys, going against Brett Anderson, coming off the best game I might have ever played, certainly has played this year. I have no issue especially if people somehow end up a little bit under where the ownership projects because of Anderson having that one good game. Anderson, a guy that just the numbers don't back out what he did last game. And there's nothing in terms of strikeout rate, historically a 13% K rate guy. I'm also a guy who gives up not a ton of power to lefties, but still gives up a good amount of contact across the board. I think going to Arizona is one move that I'm okay with on the slate.
Yeah, and you should be. As I said, up against lefties on the entire season, 35.9% hard hit percentage. That's the highest in the majors. So they're getting a lot of batted balls to go into play. And when they do, they're getting hit hard. That does not set up well for one Brett Anderson on the other side, who is giving up nearly, this is a dumb number, 50.3% hard hit percentage on the season. X slugging of 560. Hello. That's not great for him. I will say the one thing in his positive category, this is probably going to be a death by a million cuts more than it is going to be a bunch of homers. 4.3 launch angle. That's kind of been the theme of the day. You and I like talking about that launch angle. It's an important characteristic when trying to target one-offs, trying to target who can possibly hit homers here. And Brett Anderson keeping the ball down a little bit, but my God, is it getting hit just absolutely smoked hard.
Yeah, and there are guys here, like it's not so much Kedel Marte or Josh Rojas up top, but guys like Cabrera, Walker, Josh Reddick, and Steven Vogt in particular, guys who do cut that ball upwards a little bit more, as we talked about. That can be guys who get to Brett Anderson more and take advantage of even a low launch point by him. We got about seconds left by the time you guys hear this, so get those lineups in if you haven't yet. Do you want to give a home run pick to close it out, Eric? I feel like that's something we can do here to get us to the finish line.
Okay. Oh, well, I want my home run. I want it to be Chas McCormick or Abraham Toro, but can I give my back-to-back from the 2 and the 7 hole? I absolutely love it. Back-to-back because I want them to be up every single inning of this entire game now at this point in time. I'll go, if I'm going to go off the board, let's do one that you generally wouldn't hear a lot of. I'll go Joey Votto going up against a lefty, J Happ. I still think Cincinnati has an opportunity to be going off here. I went a little bit lower. Happ was just a price play, and that was the reason I had 8% of him. Now I've got down to 3. I ended up going to a little bit more. Jake Odorizzi is my cheapie, but I think Cincinnati's in a good spot. Joey Votto, Jesse Winker, give me either one of them.
And I think for me, I'm going to, just based on my ownership, I will take a red and I'll take Tyler Stevenson. I think it's going to be the one that, it's just because I'm playing just so much of him and apparently in a way that I would not have normally tried to do. But hey, that's the show. That's when you're figuring out your MLB sheet live on the show. The combination of the two here and going against J Happ, never going to complain about that one. Eric, what are the plugs for you here? Obviously, people should be following you on at Eric Lindquist, as well as me at Chris Spags. But what else do you have coming up here this week?
No, that was a beautiful learning experience that I'm going to play less lineups going forward on a live before lock show. But I'm doing the MLB slate starter. I'll be up in the morning early tomorrow doing the strategy show. I don't know. I think I'm doing it with you tomorrow morning. Is it a West Coast goodie?
Yes,
time?
And I will be on it every day, every morning this week. So yeah, nice bright and early wake ups.
All right. I'll postmate you some coffee. We'll get going. But very excited to be doing that. As always, a lot of fun doing a show with you. Best of luck. Hopefully Christian Yelich doesn't get me DM'd 50,000 times by going for 2 homers tonight.
And make sure to go follow at Awesemo_com as well for all the content we do, as well as some flash giveaways that sometimes we even get a chance to promote on the stream. So if you want to win those free Awesemo Plus memberships, make sure to check that out. And also play over at PrizePicks. The slate may be over for the DFS slate on DraftKings and FanDuel, but you can continue to make your PrizePicks over there. And again, it's a really simple form of DFS where if you are frustrated by MLB, if you're like Eric and I, and you're going to get completely buzzsawed today by a game that could end up postponed, then you can play on PrizePicks and get that money back. And if you get 5 of your picks right, you get 10x your entry fee. So go check them out at PrizePicks. Download them in the App Store or on Google Play and use that promo code Awesemo for a $100 deposit match. And that's all for us today, guys. So enjoy the rest of your days. And for all the new players and the experienced players out there, good luck.